Oakland, California. My name is Jason Miles, and this is Revolution. I just want to say a big shout out. We actually did it a week or so ago, but 50,000 downloads on the audio podcast across all the platforms where this show is listened to. So I want to say thank you for everyone that has tuned in, for everyone that has shared the show, for those very few of you that have been around from the very beginning. Thank you. It means a lot. I'm in awe. I started doing this. I had no idea the 50,000 number looked like almost like a joke. Like I would never hit it. I remember at one point, 25 a week, and I was like, hey, not bad. And now here we are, over 4,000 downloads a week. So thank you guys. It means the world to me. Pascal and I were talking about it today. We were both kind of in shock at the growth. And I was originally going to split this episode up into two because it's so long. So what I think I'll do is I'll timestamp it where our guest comes on about 2 hours into the conversation. So if you're listening to this right now, if you don't want to hear the conversation between me, Pascal, Marcus of the Left Flank Vets, and me, Gene Bajlan, then about the 2 hour mark is where our guest, Priya Gopal, comes in, and we talk about the UK, and we play the clip, which was a clip I'm pretty proud of. We got to put one of my favorite UK pundit. He's now a bit of a pundit. He's a rapper, actually. His name is Akala. I discovered him probably... The clip that I used was the clip that I first found him on, 7-8 years ago or so. Calling out Tommy Robinson's bigotry in a very smart way. Without just yelling out, you're a bigot, you're a bigot, you're a bigot, right? Because that's Tommy Robinson's whole thing in the UK. Like, what do you mean I'm a bigot? I just don't like Muslims. There's Muslims. And my co-host being a practicing Muslim, I know he'd appreciate that exact clip. So really enjoy Akala. Hopefully he'll come on the show. That'd be a great guest. But Priya Gopal, I saw her, and we talked a little bit about it on the show with a poet. I forget the gentleman's name. And they had a great conversation about something that's similar that we're dealing with here in the States, which is the UK dealing with legacy, right? Especially when your legacy is alive. We're about to do a show for the podcast with historian and Professor John Graham on residential schools, and even that's causing a stir in Canada, who's a lot more woke, so to speak, in the way they handle Native affairs. Woke doesn't mean everything's perfect. It's just they acknowledge the atrocities a hell of a lot more than we do in the U.S. Even trying to find British archival footage on the Bengal famine in the early to mid to late 40s. I did find some in that native language, in Indian, but there was no one there to translate for me at 2 a.m. when I was putting the video together, so I had no idea what was being said. So I did find some old newsreel footage, and we put it in there, so you're going to hear that in the clip. But she was a fun guest. We actually look forward to having her back when there's more time. So the reason why this show is so long, first of all, the Saturday show we call the free show. And we call it the free show because we don't cut it at an hour and then go to a patron bonus half. This is the free show. This is the party to get you guys to come to the big party every Tuesday and Thursday at 6 p.m. Pacific Standard Time on youtube.com/This is Revolution Podcast. And there was a miscommunication, and we knew the guest was going to come a little later, but we didn't know she was going to be like 2 hours later because she had some prior engagements. And Saturday has become the only day we can get people that live overseas because of the time difference. But we had a great 2-hour discussion. We actually were pretty prepared to riff on the goings on of the day, which is kind of fun for us because we don't get a chance to do that too often because we have a guest and we stay on topic. So the Saturday format's going to change slightly when I get back from this break, but it's still going to be the same free show format. So if you want to bypass the conversation on that was very topical, the 2-hour mark is where you need to go. If you are enjoying what you're hearing and you have the means and you feel so inclined, you'd like to help the show grow, become a patron. Patreon.com/Bitter Lake Presents. And when you hear that music, that means it's time for me to shut up. The Saturday crew, Pascal, me, Mean Gene Bajalan, Marcus from the Left Flank Vets. 2 hours, the 2-hour mark, Priya, Gopal, and I am out. Good morning, everyone. How are you guys? Happy Saturday. We have a pretty packed show today. Our guest is going to be coming on a little bit later than usual, but we definitely have some members of the Saturday crew. Let me bring in my homie, my dog, coming all the way live from Miami, Florida. He is the Pascal Robert.
Peace and greetings to the chat. Peace and greetings to the audience. Peace and greetings, Jason Miles.
Hey. Also wearing probably the dopest hoodie I've ever seen that you just can't get anymore because it's a limited edition. He is Marcus of the Left Flank Vets.
What's up? The reason why it's limited, the inside of it is actually bald eagle. I don't remember who made this again.
Some dope ass band from Oakland that allegedly makes all the music for this show.
And he's in the epicenter of COVID, a hotbed of danger. He is an academic. He's an author. He's a dad. He's a husband. He's a good listener. He is Mean Gene Bajlan.
Good morning, everybody. How's everyone doing?
What's up? What's up?
Well, I wanted to say here, like you mentioned Marcus's hoodie, but I actually think Pascal's purple top, it's a beautiful shade of aubergine, and it's like, it suits him.
You said aubergine related to Jean? Is that why you said aubergine?
What's this thing? It's you call it an eggplant in America, right? An aubergine.
Oh, don't
That's
call
a
it
racial connotation, man. Don't talk about eggplants and black people.
eggplant is bad.
No?
That's what the Italians, that's what the Italians, the Goombas.
Yeah.
Is that what they call them? So
Yeah,
there's
man.
like a racial
Yeah, man. You Moulignans. You freaking Moulignans. The Moulies.
It's very racial.
Is that what
Moulignans.
it is? Oh man, like I like aubergines. They're like a central component to my cooking.
Okay, but aubergine, eggplant, only describe that in cooking.
Okay,
Don't-
I was talking about the color of his shirt. It was like a rich purple.
Thank you. But the Italians in certain urban ethnic enclaves use the term Moulignan. The freaking Moolies.
Oh, is that what that means? Oh, I
Yeah,
have no idea. I don't know all the lingo yet. I need to be careful.
When you grow up when you're traumatized growing up in New York City or Chicago or other those places where you have a lot of, multivariate white ethnics, you get used to this kind of stuff.
What I was gonna say before Gene started throwing out racial slurs.
Is this live? Are we live right now?
We come in with the fire. I am so
Gene calling me an eggplant. Holy shit.
Oh, no.
Gene calling me an eggplant. Friggin' eggplants.
hey, fucking
That's really a thing.
funny guy. Hey, eggplant
Crazy.
guy.
That's crazy.
What with the friggin' eggplants and their freaking rap music, eh?
This is Mooly. Hey, Mooly.
Why you sound like Chris Cuomo now? That's like a good Chris Cuomo.
Yeah, exactly.
He sounds exactly like Chris Cuomo.
Hence the point.
Oh shit! Somebody's asking what the M word mean. We have some foreigners on today because we have a UK guest. They're asking what's the M word Mooly mean.
Moulignan literally means eggplant.
Which we call in Great Britain an aubergine.
So you call eggplants OBGYNs?
Yeah.
Wait a minute.
Is that what they call them in Haiti? Because I think aubergine's a French word now.
Aubergine. You know what's really interesting? I don't know what the Haitian word is for eggplant. If it's aubergine in French, it's probably aubergine in. I can Google that.
Yeah,
French for eggplant.
No Frito-phobia.
Yeah, the Fritophobia it's a dangerous. And that's the thing is like the Italian people have just gained the
I
respect
think, you know what it is? It's
after winning the Euros.
I think the word for eggplant in French or in Creole is béjén. I think it's béjén.
Béjén is what's his name? That's related to Persian and Turkish. Patlıcan in Turkish and bayanjun in Farsi. I don't know what the Arabs call it, but patlıcan. There's a famous Turkish song called Patlıcan Domates. It's like about selling.
We're getting way too arcane for our audience. They're like, oh, you guys were interesting at first, but now it's just too cerebral.
So now I wanted to say this. I want to say rest in peace to a actual good friend of mine, Biz Marquis.
Yo, you know what? For real?
Hmm.
Can we deviate from the politics and for like 6 minutes talk about Biz Marquis?
Yeah, okay. I'll tell this is a real story. So I had got a job, me and my now ex got a job touring with a kids TV show called Yo Gabba Gabba in like 2010. And we had never seen the show. We got the job mainly because we weren't going to be weirded out around celebrity. And we were going to be working basically primarily in a VIP after party. So people bought tickets to the show. And then if you paid a little bit more, actually, I think it was the same ticket price. There was a VIP after party where your kids got to meet the crew, or not the crew, I'm sorry, the cast, which was a different cast from the live show, and the actual face characters. So DJ Lance, they got to meet. And out of the kindness of his heart, he was not contractually obligated to do it. You got to meet Biz Marquee, and if you're familiar with the kid show Yo Gabba Gabba, Biz does a thing called Biz's Beat of the Day, where he beatboxes, and it was cool to see because kids went crazy whenever Biz would walk in the room. You would see a bunch of 3 and 6 year olds like start screaming and jumping more for him than they would for the characters, and he would sit down with every kid, and there's probably no more than. For the most of them outside of like the bigger markets we were in, New York was, too crazy. And of course, LA, right? He would sit down with every kid and like sit them on his lap and beatbox with them and talk to him. He actually hooked me up with my engagement ring. I got engaged on that tour. And that's a whole other comedic story. But it is it's really sad because he really was a really.
I've seen video of Biz with the kids, and Biz loved the kids for real.
Signed every autograph, and the work that he would do. He never took a day off, so we would have days off. We did 134 shows in like 4 months on that tour, so there was a lot of 2 shows a day, and it's a kids show, so they're earlier in the day, and on our days off, of course, it's a luxury tour, to me because I'm in a bus and we get hotels every night. So when you have a day off, it's great to sleep in a hotel. Biz would fly somewhere and DJ a party all the time. We'd be like, Biz, we're gonna go bowling on our day off. We're gonna go to the movies on our day off. He's like, no, man, I gotta go. I gotta DJ a party. Diana Ross called me. I got to go DJ her birthday. Like, it was always something with him that he had to go do. Never took a day off. And I asked one day, I was like, aren't you financially set yet?
Well, let me tell you, I have a Biz Marquee story relative to that. Right now, as you guys know, as you always joke with me, I am older than you. And yes, I was listening to Biz Marquee's music when I was like in high school and college. We don't need to go into exact years. But when I was in law school, and I was in law school in the 90s, my last year of law school was in 98. And if you don't know, BALSA is the Black Law Students Association. It's a national organization for Black students in law school. And they had their annual convention in Boston. Now, as you guys know, I did the Black fraternity thing in college. So I was, contrary to what you may believe, I was a big party guy. I used to love to dance, party, go to clubs, and I've been to lots of parties in my youth.
That you are that guy. I think you're the guy.
In my early years, I used to do a lot of partying. And let me tell you, I went to this Black Law Students Association party in Boston in a hotel. Biz Marquee was the DJ. Let me tell you right now, that is the livest party I have ever been to in my life to this day. This guy had the walls sweating. The party was so live. No one stopped dancing the whole party. I was like, yo, this is Biz? I knew Biz as an MC, but I didn't know that he was like this sick, insane DJ.
The DJ. Like, you don't understand. He flew all over. And we'd only have one day off. And it wasn't like his flights were lined up with where we were. It wasn't like we were in fucking New Haven and he was flying to, Manhattan. No, it would be like, I got to go to the Cayman Islands to go do a celebrity party, or I have to do a cruise real quick and I'll be back.
Yeah, man. Biz, I loved his music, but because of that party, I'm like, yo, Biz was a sick DJ, man. He was really, first of all, shout out to Tory Reed. Like, one of the reasons why I'm a big Biz Marquee fan is Biz put on my favorite hip hop MC, and me and Tory have the same favorite hip hop MC, which is Big Daddy Kane. You know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. Biz is what makes Big Daddy Kane possible. So I'm like, for me, like, Biz Marquee dying just brings back all kinds of memories of, like, some of my favorite hip hop. And people know Biz from his song, Only Just a Friend in the Vapors. But to me, the baddest Biz Markie cut, man, is Nobody Beats the Biz. Nobody beats the biz. Nobody beats the biz. That shit is hot.
Him and another guy that people don't think is, or maybe they don't know, is an amazing DJ, and they're also really good friends. DJ Jazzy Jeff.
I heard Jazzy Jeff is off the charts.
And they hung out. Like, look, a lot of the people you're naming right now, I met because of Biz, because they all came out to see him every day.
Wow.
I think I told you the story. We were in Rhode Island. And so if you know Biz and you know Cutmaster DJ Cool V,
yes,
his cousin. So Biz and V were on the tour together, right? V was pretty much Biz's manager at this point, whatever. And so the company we were out with was a sponsor of this tour. So we had all these like squeezable pouches for kids. I'm sure Gene knows what I'm talking about. The little squeezable kind of like applesauce things. This is back when that shit was still real uber bougie, right? So this company was trying to hit a certain audience. So we would have boxes of this shit shipped in, drop shipped every location. So we had to give it out to the hiring clientele or whatever, right? And so V came to me, goes, "Hey man, my boy is here. Can my boy get some of these pouches?" And I was like, "Oh, for sure, dude. I'll just give your boy a box or two. Like, how many kids does he have?" He's like, "Oh, he's got a couple kids." I was like, "Oh, word. I'll just give him like a couple boxes." So I'm giving this motherfucker like 2 boxes of this shit. So that's probably like $300 worth of this product. And him and Biz walk up to me to introduce me to their buddy who wants to say thank you. And it's Mike Bivens.
From Double Revolt New Edition.
And Biv gives me this like the biggest hug. And he's like, "Yo, word, anytime I'm in the Bay, you get in the show for free." Because he actually talks like that in real life. And the whole tour is filled with stories like that. It just constantly meeting someone you had no idea you were going to meet, or hearing Biz yell some shit out in catering that would just crack you the fuck up. We were in Toronto. No, we were somewhere in Canada, and everybody's birthday, you got whatever you wanted for catering. So if it was your birthday, you could be like, "All right, I want cheeseburgers and fries for catering," whatever, right? Fuck your allergy. This is what we're going to have for catering. That was kind of the rule. And one dude who was from Atlanta wanted fried chicken and didn't realize that we were going to be in Canada for his birthday. And you're at stadiums, and stadiums don't really, the kitchens aren't that awesome in big arenas and stadiums. So anyway, the fried chicken was horrible. It tastes like what you would think shitty fried chicken in Canada would taste like. And the few black people on the tour, who were all pretty much, most of them were like face characters, were like laughing how bad it was. And I remember Biz, we looked over at Biz because he just had this look of disgust in his face as he has this huge plate of what kind of looks like fried chicken, but it was horrible. And we look at him, we're like, "Biz, how's the chicken?" He's like, "Oh, shit's hard like Brooklyn." So I got hella missed that dude, man. He would call me hella randomly to bitch about basketball trades, like out of the blue. So yeah, man, that shit sucks, dude. And that guy had lost a fuck ton of weight.
My kid loves him. Whenever he comes on the Yo Gabba Gabba show, he stands up in front of the TV and starts going, tries to beatbox with him. And it's a really touching, it's like a really touching section they do on the show. I mean, like, Yo Gabba Gabba is like really an excellent kids TV show. Like, the music is not soul destroying, because like when you have kids, and Jason will attest to this, the music they play for kids drives you insane. Baby Shark. There's an Australian group called Bounce Patrol. His music makes you want to like liquidate yourself. But you know, they had like proper music. They have like proper musicians on that show, and they always have that section with Biz Markie going, hey kids, let's beatbox together. And it's like a really great activity for those kids to do. So that was like a very special show. I don't know what the equivalent is these days, but the kind of
there's nothing like it, man. The guys that put that show together were musicians called the Aquabats. Marcus was asking me, like, what was life like on that tour? Most of the people that were the main cast were the main cast from the show, and there was very much a family atmosphere to that show because they actually filmed in Orange County, not LA. The guys that put the show together are Mormon, so it was a pretty chill vibe. The respect people had for the job and the children, because there was quite a few people in the cast that actually had kids, made the tour a lot of fun. I mean, we definitely partied and shit like that at night because it was a day show, but that was like the most fun I've had in 4 months touring, was probably that tour. And with those people, there was probably about 50 of us total, and we would all hang out. I'm talking crew, bus drivers, cast, production people that made the costumes. Like, we all hung out. Most of us still talk to this day. What's really sad is, I think I told you this or Pascal this, that because Facebook deleted my account, I have my ex's old account because we use it as our band account. So her memories come up. Yesterday, her memory was, I was working in North Dakota and Biz had come to San Francisco and they were all going to hang out. I was like, oh man.
People are asking, is this a show about the UK? Yes, this is the show about the UK, but our guest is not going to be coming on till a later part of our current moment. So as we've done before, when a pop figure that we both are all familiar with passes away, we did a little in remembrance of, for the first 3 minutes or so, we will be talking about the British Empire. But since our guest is not here, we decided to have a current events roundtable. And if you guys will indulge me, I like to start off based on just a little due diligence I've done about what's going on in Cuba. I have found out, doing some research, that there are American rappers and entertainers who are siding with the right-wing forces in Cuba crying for American intervention, who are promoting the quote-unquote oppression of the communist regime in a rather reactionary fashion on their social media. And certain rappers and entertainers, one of them is particularly well-known. Pitbull is one of them. Fat Joe, Laz Alonso, who is an Afro-Cuban origin. And I was like, whoa, this is crazy. And they are alleging that the protest movement in Cuba was started by Afro-Cubans protesting the administration, which is interesting because I don't know too many Afro-Cubans who want to go back to how things were for them under the Batista regime. But what is also fascinating is that, based on some good sources I know from some leftists who are studying this, the allegation is that the Afro-Cuban rappers, and there are rappers who they're saying started this movement in Cuba, have been cultivated allegedly by kind of State Department color revolution organizations, National Endowment for Democracy. That's the allegation. I don't have hard evidence of that. The other statements about the American artists who are promoting U.S. intervention in Cuba is true. And what is fascinating about this, from my vantage, is that one of the segments of American society that has traditionally had a favorable view of the Castro regime and Cuba overall has been the African American community, the Black American community. You can look at old videos of Castro in Harlem during the era of Malcolm X. You can see videos of Castro in Harlem in the 90s, and he's getting profound support. There are videos of Nelson Mandela explaining why he was a great admirer and lover of Fidel Castro, because Fidel Castro sent military support to beat the South African army in the Battle of Cueto Carnaval, which was instrumental in the ending of South African apartheid. For those who don't know, you can watch the YouTube documentary Cuba and African Odyssey, and you can see the military expanse that Cuba sent to the African continent in the late 60s, early 70s to fight colonialism and basically help facilitate African independence from their colonial masters. So I just find it interesting the way in which there's the historical way in which hip hop and people who are acolytes of hip hop posited as the revolutionary music force of the youth, that it's being used now as a kind of a counter-revolutionary force. Anybody interested in chiming in on that?
Yeah, I would like to add something because I've been following this on the sort of liberal news network. So I was watching, for example, well, not watching, listening to MSNBC. They had Jason Johnson in for Joanne Reed, and he brought on a professor who basically portrayed made several very striking statements about the protest movement. First, she was like, this is an Afro-Latino-led movement. Secondly, she was like, this is an intersectional struggle. She said that, the Cuban regime is authoritarian. You can't teach critical race theory. You think I'm exaggerating, but this is literally the talking points. She was like, you can't teach critical race theory. And, maybe we should tell Marco Rubio that actually his position on critical race theory is the same as the Cuban regime's. And then she went on to say that, Castro banned all these Afro-Latino organizations in Cuba after the revolution. And this kind of woke washing of U.S. policy towards Cuba at the moment. I mean, Jason Johnson in his podcast literally has a kind of special on the protests in Cuba, which he calls the color revolution. Obviously, he's talking about people of color. And, it strikes me, whatever, the causes of protests are in Cuba is entirely irrelevant, should be entirely irrelevant to Americans. There's only one position that people should have towards Cuba, and that is to end the economic embargo and blockade, which is a huge part of the reason why the people of Cuba are suffering. I'm not going to come on here and say, everything is paradise in Cuba, but everything is not paradise in the United States. So Americans need to focus on their own government and making sure that this brutal embargo, which it hurts the Cuban people, is ended, and not fall for this kind of very interesting shift in discourse in which liberals are trying to present the Cuban regime as being sort of retrograde and racist and against all this kind of liberal race and identity politics that we are, that is being mobilized on a domestic thing. And I think it's interesting, and I'll kind of end on this, is that, this this kind of great awakening, which we focus on in terms of its impact on domestic policy, is now being utilized to justify or legitimize some kind of regime change policy towards the government in Havana.
And you know what is particularly fascinating about this, Gene, right? In talking about, political inconsistency and hypocrisy on the part of the U.S. and the State Department, is that, there's 5 seconds of a protest in Cuba against the regime, and the whole ideological infrastructure of the American chattering class, the media, State Department, Twitter, all of this is the Cuban regime must go. They must go. Yo, there have been protests against the Jovenel Moïse in Haiti for 3 years. No one popped the grape. We did a whole show on Colombia about how there are massive anti-austerity protests in Colombia for months. No one has popped a grape talking about the regime would go. Why should go? Why? Because those regimes are conveniently allies of the United States, no matter how oppressive or problematic they could be. But literally a 5-second flash protest in Cuba, and then all of a sudden the world is like, oh, the regime must go down.
I think there's been already, reports and stories that had come out about fake Twitter accounts you know, backing like, you know, the the Cuban protests or whatever. And like you said, there's whatever metrics they're utilizing, right? Of protest, and why this is just such a grand protest for Cuban people. It gets absolutely blown out of the water if you take the protests that are happening in any of those countries Pascal just listed. You can add Myanmar to the fucking group. You could fucking, and even in our own country, right? If like the few fucking dozens of people in MAGA hats that they've gotten out there, like if it's even reflective of any type of like, hey, this should be a shift in government. What is last summer's protests? What does that mean for the U.S. government? And it doesn't even go beyond the fact that like it's wild hearing a Fox News reporter ask Jen Psaki, why aren't we letting Cubans in? Okay, same southern fucking border. What's the difference here, right? And so like this whole, it's wholly fucking fake. It doesn't make any fucking, you know, it's just all bullshit. It's all fake from the liberals and conservatives, to the point where like, yeah, they're literally like, well, we need to let these people in. They're in danger. But what about people coming through Texas? Is that what do we've got going on there?
Nah, man, it's real talk. There's some real reactionary shenanigans, problematic stuff. That's, someone said, all anti-communist BS. That's a lot of that as well. There's a motivation here for that.
And I think we have to like look. We had a crisis in Haiti, and now there's these protests in Cuba. You know, people want to compare Cuba to the United States, but you know, you compare Cuba with likewise regimes, and like honestly, would you prefer to be in Haiti or with many years of American intervention, or Cuba, where you know, Cuba has had like many serious policy successes, which you know, even Obama, you know, when they changed the policy, you know, admitted that, you know, they crucified Bernie for you know, making claims that, you know, Cuba had made good advances in education. But, you know, that was something even Obama admitted. And, you know, one of the things I think that, you know, progressives and the left should be doing is at the very least pressuring the administration to go back to the pre-Trump status quo with the opening up towards Cuba. Because if you look at what this policy is, it is a pure punishment policy, right? Because, you know, this embargo, you know, this embargo, you know, makes life difficult for the Cubans, but obviously, clearly, even by their own metrics, does not promote, you know, doesn't create conditions for regime change, because they didn't change the regime for years. So, you know, if this embargo is not shifting the regime, the only reason to continue it is to brutalize Cuba to ensure that any kind of like counter idea to like American neocolonialism in the Caribbean is, you know, contained. And we see these policies going back, you know, all the way to the late 50s, 60s, 70s, to what happened in Grenada. So you know, we have this issue where you know, the United States is pursuing a purely punitive policy. There is no objective metric, even in their own terms, right, for doing this to Cuba, beyond brutalizing the Cuban population and ensuring that anyone who even thinks about pursuing a more independent line of policy that does not want their country turning into like a giant banana plantation / brothel is basically kicked, you know, is kicked to the curb and brutalized. And considering the embargo that has been imposed on Cuba, there has been, despite all that, there have been significant gains. And someone in the chat said, "Lo, we don't even need to say that Cuba is not perfect." But I think that actually matters, because it's like, even if it isn't perfect, right? It has nothing. That has nothing to do with what America's policy should be. It was like Zizek said about Saddam Hussein. It's like whether, Saddam Hussein might have had weapons of mass destruction. Saddam Hussein kind of used to hint that he had weapons of mass destruction to keep his own population in line. But that is a totally different question from whether the United States would go in there and do something about it. We have to disentangle these questions of whether a regime is good or bad and whether America should intervene. A regime could be bloody terrible. That doesn't mean America should be intervening to change that regime, because 9 times out of 10, it's going to make the situation worse. Look at Libya. Look what happened in Libya. Gaddafi's regime was not it was a freaking not a great regime. People like romanticize it to a certain degree, but there were all these cleavages. Look what happened afterwards. It's a fucking mess.
Let me ask you and Pascal this question. We talk a lot about a romanticization. Sorry if I mispronounced that. Of things that people want to call the left. And there's definitely a ton, and Pascal, I know you know this, especially in the Black community, of romanticization about Libya and Gaddafi. I want to ask you and Pascal and Marcus, all three of you, what do you guys think about the Gaddafi worship post, his very disgustingly brutal assassination? What do you think of that, Pascal?
Well, I mean, my position is that when I place Gaddafi, right, it's really interesting because though Gaddafi was a leader of a Muslim country, a largely Sunni Muslim country, Gaddafi was not very well liked by Sunni Muslim leaders at all. I think Gene would attest to that. He was not well supported at all. As a matter of fact, the countries that tended to be most supportive of Gaddafi were Black African leaders and sub-Saharan African leaders on the continent, because he did use his oil largesse to financially support a Pan-Africanist vision in the country. And he also, by the way, gave material support to the ANC, the African National Congress in South Africa, to help liberate them from the apartheid regime. A lot of people don't know, but Nelson Mandela has a grandson named Gaddafi, as a matter of fact, because of his support for that regime. So my position about Gaddafi is not so much what I think, but in terms of what has been his actions for Black and brown people in the global South. Has Gaddafi obviously he is a dictator. Did he demonstrate abuses that he probably did negative things to people in his country, harsh reprisals? I would not doubt it. Some people would accuse him of, engaging in terrorist activity. I can't speak to here or there about that. Let's say that is true. My position is this: as some of the MLs might say, when living in the imperial core of the United States, my position has always been, I don't even have to go into the imperial core, Jazz. When I know personally people like Dhoruba bin Wahad, who spent 19 years in prison as a political prisoner who was a target of COINTELPRO. When I know people like my mentor, Bruce Dixon, have friends of his that were killed by the federal government in the decade of my birth, in the 60s, I'm not going to sit here and act like the United States is some kind of bastion of liberty. I was watching Laz Alonso talking about how, in Cuba, you can't criticize the government. I was like, have you heard of the United States surveillance in the recent history of media discourse that we have right now?
There's a girl getting charged for crumpling up a Blue Lives Matter sign in front of a cop.
What are you talking about? I was like, Barack Obama, he used the Espionage Act against more journalists than in the whole history of the act in 2 administrations as president. You're talking about freedom of speech? What are you talking about? What was Edward Snowden talking about? It's how we have NSA surveillance of all of our information. It's amazing to me why I see these guys who have the political education of a kindergartner talking about it. I was like, XYZ regime is so oppressive. Until 65, like over 60% of Black people in this country were picking cotton and working as servants in people's houses. I was born in 68, and you want to talk about oppressive regimes? What are you talking about? We have more people in prison in America than China or the Soviet Union ever had. What are you talking about? And I'm supposed to get all tied up because a country that has been under the sheer attack of American capitalism since its inception in 1957, being Cuba, has some oppressive aspects of it? Really? It's absurd.
You want to say something, Marcus?
Yeah, I mean, as far as going back to like the Gaddafi worship, like I think there's there's a lot of people who are just ignorant to facts. I think within the United States, there's a lot of shit that the government through all of the 3-letter agencies, right, have told enough lies, have done enough bullshit to where some people, just anything that they say, I'm going to believe the opposite. I think that part of that feeds into it. But at the end of the fucking day, there's a lot of people who just don't know any fucking better, right? And it could be for good, bad, and different, like out of any fucking world leader. But yeah, I mean, like what Pascal is saying is absolutely fucking real, and this is something that we talk about all the time. But like, Congresswoman, what is it, Beatty, was just arrested in the Hart Senate building because she was protesting for voting rights. This is 2021. A black congresswoman is getting arrested in the Hart Senate building because she was protesting for voting rights. First time ever you'd see, and like it was wild because there's only 12 protesters, 30 cops. Strange how they can do that now.
But this goes back to what Daruba was saying on our show. Is like, why are black people fighting battles that they already won again?
Exactly.
That was one of the strongest and most powerful points that he made last week, was that, for all this racial progress discourse, I would certainly say it's a lot easier to be in an elite profession as a person of color or a woman. It's a lot better than it was in 1960, but like on a mass level, we're seeing these huge reversal of voting rights, suppression of the votes, and increasingly authoritarian laws being driven by a Republican Party, which is like now openly authoritarian. And this was something that, me and Michael Brooks wrote about this like in 2017, because, we saw all these, Americans always, there was a lot of discourse amongst Republicans about how Erdogan in Turkey had protesters beaten up in front of the American embassy. If people remember that, his security detail attacked some protesters. And, had all these figures like John McCain going, oh, this is terrible. It's like, bro, your fellow party members are trying to make it legal to run people down in protests and allow people to get away with it. And to return to the Gaddafi question, I totally agree with, Marcus. Some people are just so sick of the lies that they get pumped from mainstream media and things like that about other parts of the world, that they just believe the opposite. Now, I would say about Gaddafi, as someone of Kurdish origin, Gaddafi was quite good on the Kurdish question. He would always make fun of the Arab leaders for not recognizing Kurdish rights to self-determination and stuff. At home, he had a kind of patronage regime where some parts of the country got better development than other parts of the country. If you were in Tripoli, it was pretty good. If you were in other parts of the country, it was less good. But, at the end of the day, the guy was making agreements with the West by the 2010s. After the Iraq War, people don't remember this. People like Tony Blair, David Held from the London School of Economics, they were going over there and talking about how there was ideological synergy between New Labour's project and Gaddafi's Green Book third way politics. So, you have this you have a regime that was perfectly willing to work with the West. So, I'm not going to be defending Gaddafi as some hero, but there's no doubt that he did things which, he gets a lot of affection from people in Africa, which, like Pascal says, why the heck should the South Africans be so grateful towards the United States, which during the 1980s was declaring Nelson Mandela a terrorist, and be angry at Fidel Castro and Colonel Gaddafi, who were being in favor of the liberation of those of Africa from white minority, South Africa from white minority rule. So I think we can talk about this on two levels. When we're having discussions within the left, I think we should be very frank and open about the nature of political regimes. I think we can look at Cuba and we say that, I agree with our friend Cuba on this issue, that we can look at countries like Cuba and China and say, look, they're doing good things or good aspects of policy. We don't have to buy in to the entire project to recognize some positive aspects of what's going on there. And at the same time, we should be focusing instead of trying to tell the Cubans how to run their country and trying to intervene in their economic and political processes. We should be focusing on changing things at home and changing American policy. When it comes to a policy on Cuba, end the embargo, and if you really do care about political freedom in Cuba, allow Cubans who want to come to America free movement to America. But beyond that, leave Cuba alone.
I think there's a pretty broad policy stance for the U.S. foreign policy that I would like people to start talking. We talked a little bit about this when we had the guest on talking about Iran history. But at the end of the fucking day, Americans, and especially the left, need to focus on stopping the harm, whether it is the embargo on Cuba, sanctions with Iran, the blockade for Yemen, supporting Saudi bombings and everything like that. Basically, we just need to come from the understanding to stop harm across the fucking board, because like you said earlier, 9 times out of 10, which is 9.999, right? U.S. gets involved, it's going to be bad because the interests are not in helping anyone in any country.
Yeah, not altruistic.
Yes, it's just not going to fucking happen. And so, we need to stop, right? Work on just stopping the harm and not actually trying to have some type of hot take on what's best for some other country that we've never stepped foot in. And as far as other policies and not standing these whole regimes, it's just, I actually am a policy fucking guy, so it's pretty easy for me. But that's the thing too, is that you can just take a policy or a certain instance. Hey, as far as the literacy rates, as far as the infant mortality rates, as far as the fact that they ship off doctors to help almost any scenario that they possibly can. Hey, Cuba, fantastic. Pulling the most people out of poverty, creating a huge manufacturing sector in the technology base that's literally breaking the fucking U.S. You could give it to fucking China on that. But at the end of the fucking day, you don't need to, I'm not going to have a Xi Jinping poster up in my fucking wall for any of that shit.
Let me address this super chat. Dozens of people have died and hundreds injured in Colombia in protest against that regime. But one person allegedly died in the Cuban protests, and it's an international crisis. Hello, they're going back to our earlier point. Where is the equality of opposition, equality of outrage between what's going on in Colombia and what's going on in Cuba? There's not, because this is not about justice. This is ideological. It's purely ideological.
There was more Americans injured in the Black Lives Matter protests than people were at these against Cuba protests. And the numbers just don't make any sense.
Outside of Miami, where Pascal is, from my understanding, in Cuba, they're pretty much done. It was that day, and that was it.
And let me tell you what's fascinating, right? I'm glad you mentioned that, Jason. Our governor in the state of Florida, Ron DeSantis, or some would say DeClantis, is literally, passed an anti-protest bill to sanction pretty much Black Lives Matter. If you get caught protesting on the highway, blocking traffic, so on and so forth, more than a certain fixed number of people, you will get arrested. All these Cuba protests break out, going crazy, buck wild in Hialeah and whatnot. Everyone's asking Ron DeSantis, what's going on? Oh, well, that policy wasn't created for this kind of circumstance. And people are like, oh, why? Because their shade is not dark enough for you to implement this draconian ass policy? So for Black Lives Matter, you protest, you get the barricades. But for the Gusano Cubans, you get hugs and kisses from Ron DeSantis.
And this is why the liberal reaction to January the 6th is dangerous, because January the 6th has scared a lot of liberals, which has led them to embrace a greater securitization of American policy. That's always how you do it. Even if we do agree that suppressing January the 6th would have been a positive thing, and so on and so forth. The fact that it's encouraged liberals to think, oh well, we should move forward with greater securitization. Who's that going to be used against? If you create these tools, it is not as if states utilize those two tools equally, right? They will utilize them in a deeply partisan fashion. Like in Turkey, they have like anti-racial hatred, anti-ethnic hatred laws. And those laws are never used against Turks who say racist things about Kurds. But if you mention anything that, if Kurds mention anything about their identity, they could be liable to being, taken to court for inciting racial hatred. So the law is never blind, right? The law is always implemented by a state. So if you enhance the state's ability to, engage in securitization of policy, who do you think is going to be executing these policies, right? Even if you have a nice, friendly, liberal regime, which they're not usually that nice and friendly, you'll eventually get some nutcase who will use legal powers, perfectly legal powers, to engage in all kinds of suppressive tactics. And comparing, and on kind of one final point is, I think also, when we look at the United States and we look at the type of political repression that takes place in the United States compared to, let's say, a country like Syria or Iran, the United States, has an enormous, is so powerful. It doesn't always need to engage in beating everybody up to ensure them. There's this distinction between a kind of strong state and a fierce state. A fierce state is actually a weak state because it has to use violence to maintain power. In the United States, you have this impersonal legal infrastructure that helps the state maintain power. You have all these civil society organizations that operate as a kind of arme propre of the state. So just because the American state does not have to round up hundreds of thousands of people for political activity, it doesn't mean that it's not engaging in kind of political suppression through both security measures, but also through ideological warfare, in what Pascal always refers to as the ideological superstructure of society.
Gene, there's a super chat I think you should read.
Yeah, Gene, think about how much more surveilled we have been since 9/11 attacks. If they up the security due to the 1/6, it's going to be like China. I mean, is China that much more surveilled than the United States? We self-surveil, and a lot of this surveillance infrastructure is controlled by private sector. So, I mean, yeah, I think it's the ridiculous thing that people talk about, isn't it? It's you have all these people freaking out about getting the vaccine because they're worried that Bill Gates is going to put a chip in them and track them down. When in fact, they've come up with a system where people quite willingly hand over their information, their political opinions, and so on and so forth. So, this huge infrastructure exists. We've already seen mass surveillance programs. There's no reason that this couldn't, this private infrastructure can't be, can't be used for political repression.
I think it's wild to me that it's the same type of people who are, screaming about censorship and or not wanting to be, surveilled or anything like that are also the same people who are literally live streaming them breaking into the U.S. Capitol and shit like that.
Or people that live stream themselves doing criminal activities.
Yeah, literally, it's the same type of shit. And there's and this is what's funny, which I think is going to be a huge blow up in their faces. But Now, the right wing is gone as far as like, hey, making their own media platforms, and now their own like cell phones. It's like a freedom phone, where I think like this thing is if it's not actually regulated, if it's not actually secure, it's all it's gonna do is end up giving more and more of people's data and information. But like that's like you're alluding to though, it's like.
Did I ever tell you about the time one of the promoters that we dealt with went to jail? We went to like prison for transporting pot right before it got legal in his state, and he was in Fed prison, and he said a lot of the Fed prisons he was in were private, so them guards made like $10 an hour, so the motherfuckers just didn't care. So hella cats was getting cell phones snuck in, and he said all they were doing was taking selfies and shit.
Yeah.
Well, what the funny thing is, I think with these right-wing people, I think the reason they do that is that they don't even consider that they will be like repressed, because these people have like the, if not the open, but have like the security forces in the United States have far more tolerance for those people. So they've been able to get away with things. The reason people were going to the protest, taking selfies and stuff like that was because they thought they would get away with it, right? Because they haven't had any comeback.
Because they sing, "I'm proud to be an American." At least I know I'm
There's
free.
a woman that I know pretty well that was doing live streaming from the protest, and I guess Facebook was taking all live streams down. So then she was doing like a photo update, like, "Hey, look," and I was like, first of all, oh my God, I have no idea that you were into that shit. And second of all, oh my God, you're there chilling, grinning in the photos and shit.
I know someone who was there too, and that person, a member of their family, posted a picture of them in the morning, of course, where it was like, "I'm so proud of my daughter defending America" and stuff like that. And then in the afternoon, well, she was, just to be clear, that this friend of mine was not involved in any of the shenanigans, but it's just like things went south very quickly. But I do think, like this surveillance state, like people talk about China, and I think some of the surveillance stuff in China, maybe it's overblown, maybe it's not, but I'm sure, there's a very strong surveillance infrastructure in China. That's how they collect data on public opinion in China. That's how they can be, to a certain degree, responsive, in some ways, is that they spy on people to see what they're angry about. But in America, you have all, and in China, people are talking about this social credit thing. Well, my friends, in America, we have social credit called your credit score, which deeply affects how you can live your life, right? And I just want to brag. I want to humble brag here, like, because I moved to the United States, like in my 30s, like my credit score is like really, really good. But like, I can imagine if you lived here all your life.
Talk about capitalist realism.
Yeah, I mean, but your life is dictated about how much credit you can get, whether you can. That's a very big factor that we don't think, and because these things are privatized, we don't think of them as a state institution. We don't think we have this false dichotomy between state and private sector, which doesn't exist in reality.
And there's something also to be said, though, is like, even with this whole like credit thing, just within my lifetime, like when I was like literally like 19, 20 years old, I was able, with my fucking dumbassery, to get a place to fucking live. I was able to not only like work a few part-time, like a few jobs, but it was like, it was fucking just possible. Nowadays, just to rent some shit a fucking apartment, like it's the equivalent of fucking buying a house like 15, 20 years ago.
Oh my God.
The amount of hoops you got to jump through, the pre-qualifications and all this shit. It's damn near impossible.
Especially as rent gets more astronomical, especially places where I am, where San Francisco is starting to go down a little bit. But as rent is on a whole nother level, some people need almost 10 grand to move into an apartment. And you make so much more than the rent. I forget what they want.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's totally insane.
The rent is too damn high.
Yes. I do have.
Hey, who was that guy? Is that the rent is too damn high guy? He wasn't he in New York?
I forget his name. He had a nice mustache.
He had an
talking about
elegant mustache. Oh, actually, a good point is I don't know what my credit score in the UK is, right? So I don't want to find that out right now.
So speaking of the UK, I have a clip of one of my favorite British rappers, and I do have two people that I know that are British rappers. I'm not very deep into the British hip hop scene because that, to me, it's a different language that I don't really know, like all their slang and shit.
You mean English?
No, it's all they talk. It's all different shit. You island people.
It's spoken in English.
Is it
Speak for yourself, man.
Is it Pete and Baz?
I'm still trying to figure out what Dizzy Rascal was saying in 2005.
Fix up, look sharp.
Yeah, I don't know what that is.
Let's put your clothes on and look good.
Well, that beat is the sickest beat.
Pascal has a very good London accent. He goes, "All right, mate, how you doing? You doing all right there, my You all right? You all right, mate? You all right, mate?" That's not how people where I come from speak. But I did live in London, and Pascal, there's an excellent Cockney builder. Yeah. Cockney builder, isn't it?
But there's a dude that I found some years ago, maybe like 7-8 years ago, and he was on a talk show. His name is Akala, and I've kind of followed his career since then. And I think he does less rapping and more public speaking, which he's really, really good.
Well aware of Akala, intellectual dude. He follows me on the Twitters.
Oh, well.
You need to get him on the show.
I get it.
Right.
Everybody wants fucking Pascal on their show.
Oh, don't hate.
Jealousy. Ooh.
It's the green-eyed monster. So let's watch. I want to watch this clip, and I want Jean, who's also the native in this show.
Jean is a limey.
His take on this rant.
Race, we tend to focus on individual acts of prejudice, which is why UKIP often come up because they will overtly say stuff that we find offensive. But unfortunately, the issue of race, if we understand it, is a lot more insidious, and it takes a lot more of a historical view to understand the difference between individual bias and structural racism and privilege. And the idea of Great Britain was intimately tied to the fact that Britain's invaded almost every country on the earth, literally. No, literally, there's a map, you can Google it. And so the idea of our greatness was intimately tied to this idea of empire, which was intimately tied to what Rudyard Kipling calls the white man's burden, to go and civilize all these stupid brown folks that have been writing and having civilizations for thousands of years, but let's forget all of that. And so if we fast forward to today, when we talk about structural racism in Britain, do we have the same institutional disparities in rates of imprisonment that they have in America? Yes, absolutely we do. Do we have the same disparities in terms of who's dying in police custody? Yes, indeed we do. In 2011, we were told we loved Libyans so much we wanted to bomb democracy into them. Less than 5 years later, we're leaving people fleeing the same conflict to drown in the sea, while giving a woman space in a national newspaper to refer to them as cockroaches. And when you refer to humans as cockroaches, that is a mandate for murder. Let's be clear about that. The moment human beings become non-human, that is a mandate for murder, and there's a long historical parallel with that. Today, Germany, the country that bombed this country, in our grandparents' lifetimes, so theoretically the grandchildren of Nazis can get in and out of England easier than the grandchildren of people from the Commonwealth who fought against the Nazis. And where do they come from? When we talk about immigrants, do we mean people from Australia and New Zealand? Didn't Boris Johnson go to Australia and say, hey, we're culturally the same? Was he talking about the Aborigines when he said that?
We call them expats.
Right. White people have such a different way of classifying themselves that white immigrants are expats and non-white immigrants are immigrants. So when we say immigrants, if we go to border control, we can go there, Yarswood, and we go and look at who's there. It's not a bunch of white people from New Zealand. So we have structural forms of privilege and bias that are much more insidious and much more difficult to overcome. The reaction to Africans and Asians coming here post-World War II, to rebuild the country after the Queen's German cousins bombed it, the reaction to them was one of general hatred. It's illogical. These people who had formerly been colonized by Britain had fought in both world wars. India gave 2.5 million volunteers, for those who don't know. When we talk about being saved by America in the war, we want to talk about being saved by India and Russia. That would be a bit more accurate. But that's a bit inconvenient. But the reaction to those people and their descendants has been one that is about structural bias and privilege. The greatest metaphor for this might be Canary Wharf and Tower Hamlets. Sure. If you look at that predominantly Bengali community that has to look at Canary Wharf every day, how many of those people work in Canary Wharf other than to clean toilets?
I only got into that through grime. So the first thing, I listened to grime records and they're all rapping about E14.
Yeah.
And I'm going, where's that? And I'm like, Canary Wharf?
Yeah, there's definitely not rats in the back. I suppose what I'm saying is not about saying that there's bias and bigotry everywhere in the world. The country my grandparents come from, it's pretty much generally accepted that they don't like gay people. But what's interesting, race even plays a role in that. In Jamaica, we have disgraceful homophobia. No one ever says it's because of Christian fundamentalism. Because even though it is justified in explicitly Christian fundamentalist terms, because only Muslims do bad stuff because of their religion. Because we know almost all the Muslims in the world are brown. Whereas when a German wings pilot crashes and kills 150 people deliberately, or the man in Norway killed nearly 90 people. I was in Australia when that happened. This is how uniform the agreement is that white people will be portrayed differently. The Australian media referred to Andres Breivik as having terrorist-like tactics.
Yeah.
I mean, to think about it.
Yeah.
This guy killed almost 100 people, and he's just almost a terrorist.
And he'd written a crazy thing about Muslims.
Oh, it's very clear. I mean, he was a terrorist by any standard. The idea that white is right isn't just a European idea. It's an idea that has had insidious implications, because no matter what, the 700 people that were left to drown off the coast of the Mediterranean, were they white human beings, they wouldn't have been left to drown. And they certainly wouldn't be called cockroaches.
What do you guys think of that clip?
Cheerio, mate. Bollocks, I say bollocks now.
You say bollocks. You say bollocks. People in the chat say I don't have a Hull accent, so I don't have a Hull accent because my brothers have Hull accents. But I could talk like this, bitch. What I'm trying come down, pub. Knock your neck off, won't I? Fucking knock your neck off, silly dickhead. You fucking bring it, mate. You fucking bringing it. I'll smack your fucking face in. That's how people speak in Hull.
You sound like the guy who sings the song "Jump Around." Jump around. Jump around.
Jump around, mate. We don't fucking play that silly bollocks around where I'm from. We play proper music, mate. Proper music. No, that was a pretty good clip. I mean, I like that clip. I'm not into all this like privilege kind of like language and stuff like that. But the general point he's getting across is like very salient. I think one thing you have, like Brits, liberal Americans and liberal Brits have like a very similar perspective that like America is this barbaric, backwards place, and Britain, for all its faults, is a bit better, right? Now, I think Brexit and the like interminable Tory government have sort of shattered that perception to a certain degree. But Britain has many, many retrograde aspects to it. For example, one of the reasons I live here in the United States was because it was extremely difficult for my wife and I to move to the United Kingdom because she's not a British citizen. And, you know, there's a lot of restrictions. America is actually a lot easier to move to and emigrate to than the United Kingdom or indeed many European countries. And I think it's an important distinction that we see being made, especially by the right-wing press, you know, about, cultural connections with empire, the Australians and things like that. But we, there's like a fundamental hypocrisy. And I think one of the important things that, you know, has to be brought out is like, for example, the fantasy of the Second World War in the British psyche, right? Cuba often talks about, you know, America and the American establishment living in like 1990s world when they're riding high from the Cold War. Britain lives in 1940, and there's this kind of notion of a blitz spirit that Britain stood up to the Nazis and stuff like that. Now, you'll see in discourse about the Second World War, actually, it was the Americans that saved the day. The Americans saved us. That's the narrative on the right. And the narrative on the left is, the Soviet Union won the war. Well, up until 1941, the Soviet Union and the United States weren't involved in the war. So what allowed Britain to maintain and sustain itself? It was the empire. Britain was not some plucky, like small European country standing up to the Nazi juggernaut of Europe. It was a country that was able to call upon the resources and manpower, not only of the white dominions that were basically created on the blood and bones of indigenous people, but also the vast resources of the Indian subcontinent, of Africa, of parts of Southeast Asia, and also, you know, all kinds of informal networks of influence and control across the Middle East. So the British Empire and the contributions both in economic and military terms of non-Europeans were critical to Britain's ability to fight the Second World War and resist Nazi advancement in 1940 when Britain was politically and diplomatically isolated. And this kind of double language that is played, where Muslims are, where, white nationalism, white terrorism is downplayed. Like when I was a kid, right? Honestly, when I thought of terrorism, the word terrorism in my mind was associated with Irish people, right? Because of the IRA and things like that. It wasn't until like 9/11 or maybe in the 90s that started changing. But, and the Irish always have had this kind of curious position in the British sort of narrative in which they're kind of the close enemy, right? That the nearby enemy. So I think this was a really good, it was a really good kind of blast back at the kind of hypocrisy and fantastical thinking that takes place in Britain about British national identity, and the way that we like have these kind of subtle vocabularies, the difference between an expat versus an immigrant, right? I'm an immigrant in the United States. People wouldn't call me an expat in the United States. It's like, where are you going? If you go to Hong Kong and you're a white British person, you're an expat, right? You're not an immigrant. It's like this ridiculous language designed to make differences between people. And it's like pervasive in British life. And as much as the British like to think of themselves as being somehow morally superior to the racist Americans, or at least the liberal wing of the British establishment do, that is certainly not the case. It's just our bigotry and our racism is a little bit, is orientated along slightly different axes. I don't know what other people think.
That's a very profound and extensive analysis there, Gene.
Well, I was gonna use that clip originally in the intro video that I made, but it's kind of a longer clip, and there actually is a lot of takes that he has, because for whatever reason, I would say over the last, especially maybe when his book came out, maybe about like 3-4 years ago, he's been kind of the guy to go to for commentary on the Black UK life, because there's a very similar narrative that's going on over there that we saw happening in Chicago, I would say about the same time, with, these Negroes just keep shooting themselves. So over there, of course, it's these Negroes just keep stabbing themselves. What is with these Negroes that we got over here post World War II, the descendants of these kids, where they just can't get right? And he's what's that guy's name? Pierce Morgan. He really shut that asshole down, giving him a really good class analysis on the way we even look at, or even that discussion happens around knife crime. I was in the stabbing capital of Western Europe in 2013, and it wasn't the chocolate side of London. It was Glasgow.
No, I'll tell you this, people talk about teenage pregnancies. When I was growing up in the 90s, my hometown, Kingston upon Hull, which is one of the most white major cities in the United Kingdom, was like the teenage pregnancy capital of the country. The issue is clearly, when you drill down into it, the class divisions in British society, the declining social mobility in Great Britain. Just like in the United States, in the post-war era, there were some mechanisms which allowed for like greater social mobility. Those mechanisms have been progressively annihilated over the last 40 years. Britain too has had its what Pascal calls the 50-year counter-revolution, stretching back to the Thatcher Revolution, and then of course into the Tony Blair era, in which we see a lot of this public-private bullshit being pioneered. And then now, in the kind of post-2008, we have this increasingly reactionary conservative government, which at the beginning tried to present itself as this kind of nice Obama-compliant conservatism that was like, we're gonna expand gay rights. It's important to remember, gay marriage was equalized under a conservative government, something that is, unthinkable in the American context. But now we just have like the increasing, like I see like actually a convergence between British and American political culture.
Both reactionary?
Yeah, both reactionary, both increasingly engaging in a culture war.
Wow.
I think I was boring Pascal.
No, Pascal is a narcoleptic.
The more you know.
But one thing I did want to go back to, because like something you talked on is just like this ahistorical narrative that gets run about World War II that actually, you know, like it happens largely, you know, in the UK and the US. The only difference is like for the UK, it was like just, I mean, like celebrating surviving, you know, a lot of like, especially like what they have to fucking do. You know, there's all this talk about like the Royal Air Force and all this shit like that. It was like, yeah, it's, you know, it's like kind of just barely defending your shores while utilizing the rest of the resources that they're like under fucking empire to actually support the greater effort across the world. And in the US too is like largely just not even wanted to engage in the war to allow their businesses to basically sell to both sides. And then, yeah, when you eventually like do enter the war, like a lot of it is just supplementary shit as the USSR is really taking, you know, the brunt of the effort. But this kind of like, there's like a similar thing too with this like now current modern day, like troop worship, which, you know, as a vet, yes, I take advantage of, you know, 10% discount at Denny's and shit. But like,
you get 10%. I want to clarify on this. Like, if you took me to Denny's, would you only get 10% off at what you ate, or would you get 10% off the whole bill?
I mean, so if we both went and we were both paying, and I was like, hey, do y'all have a veterans discount? Well, it just depends on, you know, like you could sometimes I encourage people to, you know, steal valor, get that 10% off, you know. But yeah, if I was paying, they'd probably do 10% off the whole thing.
Do you act like you're all fucked up like the movies and just like
no.
veteran discount?
No.
Do you have to show them like military IDs from them?
Sometimes, especially for like official shit, you know, and like there's all types of housing policy, especially like school policy, stuff like that, where like, yeah, we get an advantage, you know. And so like you gotta actually show proof. But like, I mean, sometimes like no. They just like, hey, you know, cool, whatever, here's your discount. So like, yeah, go get that shit. Or just say you like left your wallet, you know, whatever. Like,
oh damn.
Say, yeah.
Well, Golden Corral, I'm told, somebody asked about Golden Corral. I'm told Golden Corral lets veterans eat for free on Memorial Day.
Memorial Day and Veterans Day, usually a day. Yeah, there's usually some good that's when
Gene and his Golden Corral, man.
Just try it, Gene. Honestly, just say, yeah, you know, like just say you're a veteran. You know, you'll probably get it.
Accent. They're gonna look at him and his fuck. They already think he's a terrorist. Like, yeah, I'm a war vet.
I was in the Taliban. Yeah.
My dad got a citizenship like through serving the army, which is not something they really do anymore. But like, yeah, just lie to them. Get that 10%. Go for it. Steal the valor.
I was a member of the Iraqi army fighting America. You said veteran. You didn't say American veteran.
Fondue, fuck you in that chocolate fountain, and it's going to be very prison style.
There's no chocolate fountain in the age of COVID, my friends. There was no chocolate.
Well,
fountain.
now, but the Afghan interpreters, that's the hot button issue to make sure that we can stay in Afghanistan. So that's, you know.
But yeah, like let's pivot away a little bit from Britain and come back to that when our guest comes. But let's talk about Afghanistan, because that stuff is getting crazy right now. People been following
Pascal, Afghanistan. Sorry, Pascal's officially off the screen. I had to take him off the screen. I don't think he understands. He's talking right now. If you guys can see, he doesn't understand. I took him off the screen. I'm going to apologize for Pascal. You know, he can hear everything I'm saying right now.
Oh, damn.
Pascal, I'm going to walk to Florida and shove a cattle prod in your behind.
Oh.
What's the problem?
Why are you being mean to Pascal? What did he do?
Marcus said it in the private chat.
They're accusing me of nodding off during the podcast.
Wait, let's ask the chat.
Oh.
I'm being threatened with violence on my own podcast.
Yes, that's
So yeah, what about this Afghan? I mean, you were in Afghanistan, Marcus, right?
No, I was in Iraq, but I mean, I had plenty of buddies that went and they're like obviously
What were we
this is like
supposed to be?
talking about.
Were we supposed to be leaving Afghanistan?
Well, this is like we're like just like we don't leave. There's just like so many things like about the whole narrative of us ending the war in Afghanistan that was just wholesale fucking false. Because even when they talk about ending the war, contractors, military contractors were off the table, which a lot of them like are just subsects of the actual operating military, but a lot of them are not. CIA, the death squads, which actually Joe Glenton is a great UK writer that's done some work on the zero units that's supported by the CIA, as well as some of the like weird troop worship that goes around in the UK society. But at the end of the day, there's a whole list of things, and as of right now, they're talking about even still since a lot of the neighbors around Afghanistan aren't willing to work with the United States to establish bases. They already have enough capabilities to continue airstrikes and drone strikes into Afghanistan. And I think there's always this continuing narrative, which is spelled out in the Afghanistan papers, which is a bunch of FOIA documents that actually line out how the United States government, the top generals, had no idea what they were doing in Afghanistan. Like literally starting 6 months after the beginning, Donald Rumsfeld is saying we don't know where the bad guys are. So this whole like thing is just all bullshit. And so that's I mean I think a lot of what's coming out of especially from the U.S. government about these concerns of women's rights, or even we need to take time to vet people as far as the interpreters go. It's bullshit. The United States government gets to choose how quickly people come to the U.S. And the United States president especially can change some immigration law like that. It's just all U.S. bullshit.
Pascal, your take?
My position is this: is that what exactly are we seeing that the Biden administration is doing any different relative to Afghanistan, except prolonging the speed in which U.S. troops withdraw? I mean, so what we're saying is that there's basically nothing. There's been no improving of the status of affairs on the ground between Trump and Biden. In fact, worsening because he's delaying something that Trump promised to do months ago. Is that all we got?
That's it. I doubt. I mean, there's nothing different other than the extension, I think.
One thing I would say is this, though. At the very least, it does look like the Biden administration is going to stick to pulling out the troops. And I totally agree with Marcus. This pullout of troops is not going to be really an entire pullout of troops, because there's going to be these contractors, there's going to be all this infrastructure that is privatized. If you remember, a couple of years back, people were talking about Eric Prince was talking about building a mercenary army to take over from in Afghanistan. These things were openly discussed by figures both in the media, but someone like Eric Prince. And one has to recognize an increasing proportion of American military power is exercised not through the armed forces of the United States, but through private contractors. You go to we call them contractors, which when someone speaks with like I'm a U.S. Army contractor, it's like, you mean you're a mercenary?
Yeah, it's same thing like immigrants and expats, right? Contractors and mercenaries.
Contractors a little bit more squishy because it includes like civilian contractors, but the fact that we have military and civilian, military contractor means mercenary, right?
Yep.
So I don't think it's going to be a complete pull-up. But I will say this, there is being a lot of pushback. I'm seeing it in the media. There's all these tears about Afghan women. Now, and I'll tell you this, the only moral policy, we often create a dichotomy between like, we either stay forever or we pull out. Well, in my opinion, there's actually also a third option. It's pulling out, but also allowing any Afghan who wants to move to the United States to move to the United States, because you've been in that country for 20 years. The country has been bombed and ruined, and all this nation building has totally failed. when the Afghan war was executed, how was it executed? It was not a huge invasion. It was the CIA going in with these like indigenous forces. If you remember the Northern Alliance, if you remember those guys, there was a big assassination the day before 9/11 where the leader of the Northern Alliance was blown up. And I remember that very well because I was listening to it on the I'd been following the Afghan war on the BBC World Service, right? And they used these guys and they conquered Kabul and they set up a regime, right? Then they did all this nation building. And I'm sure, you know, there were people within the American foreign policy establishment who were like, we really need to rebuild Afghanistan. You know, there are people who drink the Kool-Aid. But the main reason for this nation building was an excuse to loot the American treasury. When we look at American imperialism, there are times where American imperialism is an excuse to loot a country of its resources. But in recent years, this neocon imperialism has been an excuse to loot the American treasury by like issuing all these contracts and dumping money. And I think that's what we have to understand about the nation. You know, they don't give a shit about the resources of Afghanistan. They like, there's no resources of Afghanistan. You might be able, and Cooper said it a couple of weeks back when we did this discussion on Afghanistan, was like, you know, they would tell people that there's all these natural resources to Afghanistan. That's a reason to stay. The real reason is to keep those sweet contracts going and people are making big money, right? The arms industry is making big money selling weapons.
Yeah, this is the shit that, you know, I largely drowned my head in most of my research. But yeah, there was just a report that came out, I think, early this week saying that 10 defense contractors were in the top 20 of companies that were like, you know, did best, you know, despite the pandemic type shit. The amount of money, you know, and like, so 40 is like, yeah, something like 46% of the US discretionary budget goes straight to the DoD. And then of that, you say about half is just straight up military contracts. You've got these big five companies, Raytheon, Boeing, General Dynamics, Northrop Grumman, and I think Honeywell is like rounding that out. But literally billions and billions of dollars of revenue, right? Profit and shit that is just a straight pass through that goes from the US Congress appropriations into their bank accounts for all types of weaponry that may or may not fucking work 2 decades from now. You know, and like you go back to fucking 1995, that's when they started talking about the F-35. And now we've got a $1.7 trillion piece of shit that decapitates pilots when they try and eject, can't fly in the fucking rain.
Christ.
Yeah, and it can't fucking shoot straight. They like literally they just make promises of, hey, we'll be able to make this plane do this. And then they just say, well, how much is it going to cost? Oh, well, you know about that. Yeah, we're going to need about $15 billion right now. And then a few months later, oh, we made a mistake. We can't make these parts. They're like all types of bullshit. And at the end of the fucking day, the thing that, like, war is a racket. This is a scheme for money. They're now talking about the F-35 being too expensive as a flight platform, and they need to make a new cheap one. There's just this doesn't make any sense. This is not about defense. It's not about safety. It's about making money.
Yeah, and they dump like, and the incentives and structures are like, you get given this money by the federal government, and then like you have to spend it. So they're like spending that money on like bullshit stuff just to spend the money. So it's a massive waste of resources. Now, of course, as a byproduct of a lot of military technology development is we get civilian technologies. But, you know, you could cut out the middleman and dump that money into universities and research institutes and bring them under control.
And they say socialism doesn't work.
Yeah. Well, and this is where this is where people who decry against MMT, it's already fucking happening. This is where people who, you know, this like state capitalism, we are fucking doing it. Especially when it comes to the military industrial complex. And the thing that, Gene, I want to ask you, are there any sponsored research like parts of your university that are done by any defense contractors? Because I know at almost every university around where I live right now, right? Take 6 that I could fucking find, get to within an hour. All of them have a research wing that is completely paid for by a defense contractor, i.e. Raytheon, General Dynamics, Boeing, any of these things. So
I mean, I don't think Missouri State has. We have like an agricultural college. I mean, and we have a big ROTC program as well.
No, listen. What Marcus has said is so important. The academia is often mistakenly categorized as a liberal institution within the left flank of capital. But what Marcus is detailing here is that the military-industrial complex uses and funds academia for R&D to help keep the war machine going. Now, we don't think that they're going to be social sciences like international relations, political science departments that are going to be filled with reactionaries to help buttress and support the policies that the university is taking from the funding for those military researchers. Of course there are. You think it's an accident that you have the CIA recruiting on even non-elite academic institutions nowadays? That's what posters of the CIA recruiting at fucking FIU in Miami, man.
Oh, they need the black people. They got to go outside of the elite colleges now.
Let me tell you, yeah, it's the woke CIA, man. You can be a Latina, a Latinx. You know, this is going to be the thing, isn't it? It's going to have our first trans woman, Latinx, torturer, and then the Biden administration is going to be like that social progress. But I think this is what people have to understand about academia. The mythology about academia, as Pascal says, is that it's a liberal institution. And I wouldn't deny that there are certain parts of the university that lean liberal or even leftist to a certain degree. And of course, the political right makes a lot of hay out of that as part of their cultural war nonsense. But universities aren't just sociologies and history departments, right? They are science departments, business departments, public administration departments. There are enormous parts of the university infrastructure that are now I would say this, in general, you don't find in academia the utter insane conspiracy theory far right. But you do have people who are like what we might call old school Republicans, or orientate that way, or national security liberals, the kind of people who are really into Rachel Maddow and who watch MSNBC. So you have a very strong weight in many departments that pulls politics to the right. My department is pretty left wing in Missouri State. I would probably say it's the most left wing department in Missouri State, partly because it's one of the youngest departments in Missouri State. But you go to other departments, even in my college, even in the economics department, it's far more conservatively orientated. The whole academia is like this liberal bastion is simply a ploy by the political right to stoke the culture wars, to attack what the academia does to a certain degree, provide a base where some kind of left-wing and liberal ideas can have some social prestige and have some you can think critically. So there are some reasons why academia has a positive side to it, but to characterize it as this entirely liberal bastion is a misunderstanding. There is a space in academia which allows left-wing and left liberal ideas to gain ground. Some of those ideas, as we're seeing with critical race theory, are being appropriated for the most perverse reasons. And that's nothing new, right? We talk about people are talking about the Cuba protests as being led by Afro-Latinos. The war in Afghanistan was sold to people as liberating Afghan women. You go back to the British Empire, they were justifying the plunder of the Indian subcontinent on the grounds that they were liberating Hindu women from the practice of sati, widow burning, right? So this is not a new discourse that has ever.
Can I go and I think there's actually something that happened this past week that I'm very interested in. Both of your opinions, and it's with Cornell West leaving Harvard.
How is that new news though? Wasn't he squawking about that?
There was a whole lot of dust up, but he had actually resigned officially, and there was this kind of like letter, excuse me, which a lot of people was like, oh, it's a scathing letter, but it was a lot of like personal beef. You know, some of it was like, you know, I think, you know, you could like, I'm not sure. I don't know the in-depths of tenure and how that all works. I'd assume that like leaving one place, you know, one elite establishment with tenure, going to another one, there would be some type of, you know, legitimacy there. But I don't know. At the end of the fucking day, he goes on this list of you know, largely personal grievance, which, you know, hey, you could leave any job you want. But what's missing there, you know, absolutely is the understanding of like what Harvard is, you know, and like what that institution actually provides for the world. I mean, they had a fucking office for Jeffrey Epstein. When Epstein asked the Harvard fucking school to be closer to co-eds, they let them.
I mean, yeah, you can kind of give a side eye to Cornel West talking about Harvard is becoming neoliberalized. I was like, Harvard probably created the concept of neoliberal. That was Chicago.
The Kennedy School is like literally the generator of this fucking bullshit corporate public-private partnership type of politics that completely just, you know, sells away the game. This like that's their baby. Clintonite third way bullshit.
I mean, I think that my whole thing is this. I mean, Cornel West's letter. I read the letter he wrote. He's, you know, questioning the intellectual value of what's going on in the university, that is being cannibalized by neoliberalism, and that its stellar reputation in the past, and blah blah blah. And I think Marcus makes a fair critique in that, like, it's a totally liberal criticism of Harvard. There's no radical materialist, anti-imperialist, no real class analysis of what that institution represents within the constellation of the power elite in American society. That discourse doesn't exist. Why is there no discourse about, well, what does it mean to be the most renowned public intellectual in America, Black public intellectual in American society, and to feel some kind of emotional way about having to leave an institution that is the fulcrum of power elite global management for the United States? Like, wouldn't that demand of you as a leading left public intellectual to leverage a more kind of direct critique of what the function of that institution is, as opposed to some kind of liberal, almost kind of like, I don't know, getting emotional about, oh, I loved this place once.
And I mean, I guess I have to ask myself, is Cornel West's idea or love of this intellectual higher learning, you know, this type of like, you could define it probably better than I, but it's like, it seems like he's like in love with this like idea of intelligentsia.
How can he make that critique? How can like, as much as Cornel West is an important public intellectual, has at times made very good critiques of the system and so on and so forth, how can an individual whose career is entirely carried on within the elite institutions of the United States that are not public, they're not even public institutions. You know, if you're at Oxford or Cambridge, you can at least hide behind the fact that those are publicly controlled institutions. These are private institutions. So, you know, like with Cornel West and with Hannah Jones and on all this stuff, on one hand, I have sympathy. Like, Cornel West is like clearly persecuted to a certain degree because he stands up on Palestine and he says things. He doesn't go within the guardrails necessary. But on the flip side, he is a product of the neoliberal university. Why do I say that? Because the neoliberal university is like a football team. You need to hire a rock star academic that's going to attract public attention. You know, Edward Said, you know, this like great bastion of you know, critical thought within the American academic establishment, also benefited from the fact that he was a rock star academic. And so, this neoliberal university creates people like Cornel West. So there's a kind of contradiction.
Say it again for the people in the back.
The neoliberal university creates these people because it creates this notion of a rock star where you have, me, I couldn't even imagine, like, Cornel West is complaining about it. He at least has got a freaking job, right? Most academics, right? If I lose this job, I'm going to be unemployed, right? I'm not going to be able to like transfer immediately to another fancy university. And I'm a relatively privileged person. I have a degree from a prestigious university. I have a tenure track position, but I'm not a rock star academic who is like, bringing public notoriety to universities that are attracting things. Same with Hannah Jones. Like, it's kind of shitty that they changed up the conditions of her tenure, that position that she had, because of the public controversy and the response to, the politicization. Basically, as far as I understand, what you had was an administrative intervention into a process that should have been controlled by the faculty. But at the same time, it's like, she's going to go to Howard University and get a sweet job. What about the hundreds and thousands of people who are in crippling student debt and are teaching 6 courses in universities, and at the same time are being shit on as being like elitist snobs when they're like can barely make ends meet as adjuncts?
Yeah. Well,
So this kind of like this is like pure what Pascal would call like politics of symbolism. It's like people are like doing a victory lap because Hannah Jones has got 20 million to set up a journalism institute at Howard University, rather than thinking about like how do we make it possible that more Black and minority academics can enter academia? Because in the first place, if you're a Black person in academia, if you can like mobilize your identity, good job. But how do you even get onto a PhD in the program in the first place? Because you come from a poor background and you can't take the risk of spending 7 years, 7 years doing a PhD, ending up with huge student debt, and then boom. So you just go and do like your undergraduate degree and you become a nurse or what have you. So like on one hand,
how about you are a Black or Latino person who gets into a PhD program, who comes from a hard economic background, and because there's no market for the real research you want to do that is counter-hegemonic, or you can't get it funded, you end up doing status quo, critical race theory, intersectionality, liberal crap, because you can't be doing materialist analysis of how neoliberal capitalism actually really needs to be flipped on its head, because you're not going to get that Ford Foundation money for that.
Correct me if I'm wrong, and like if it isn't that a little bit of even how people are funneled into some of these higher, education processes, is that like even order to just get started, your first is just working as an underling for somebody else's research, and so like to Pascal's question of like, oh, how do you even get to have your research funded? What hoops do you have to go through? Even to get to the point where you can ask for money, you already had to be molded in a research project that is largely probably neoliberal and worthless to begin with.
Can I expand to a question, if you don't mind?
Oh, yeah. I think we got time.
Is the American / Western University truly a bastion of revolutionary change?
I mean, I don't think
here now.
I don't think so now. There is one thing I just want to address in the chat, which is someone noted that we don't need more professors. And I would just say this. Part of the neoliberal model of education is a hierarchy of universities, right? So if you go to Harvard, you get like small classes, a lot of personal attention, and a lot of care. If we want a more equitable education system, we need more professors, but not at elite institutions, serving at community colleges so that they can focus on the students there. Like if you go to a community college, you're in a class with I don't know how many students. You got like 50 students in the professor.
The only way I agree with that is that there's too many professors and teachers that are working as insurance fucking salesmen or some other fucking bullshit ass job, just sending emails back and forth.
Teachers at a community college.
Yeah. Well, that's like but the thing, there's a fucking big problem of there's teachers is like one of the number one jobs to fucking leave because there's no way to just make it fucking happen. And you got teachers who are just not teaching and they just need to be paid.
How about it's not so much that we need more professors, but we need more real radical professors?
Well, yeah, but in a general sense. But I would say this: what we need is a redistribution of wealth within the American higher education. We need to seize the endowments of institutions like Harvard and redistribute that largesse to colleges that serve communities across the nation. People go, "Oh, we don't need history." I think public access to doing a humanities should not be the preserve of the rich. If you want to study history, you should be able to study history. Now, that doesn't mean you have to have a career in history, but if we believe in an educated population. Now, the question of do we need more radical professors? That's a political question. Yeah, I mean, I would like to see more professors teaching from a radical perspective, but I think on the structural argument I'm saying is the problem is that we have within higher education a caste class division, a division between universities that have institutional money, that have all this good dollar. Like, how big is Harvard's endowment? 20 billion, right?
Yes, the biggest in the nation, right? Or the world.
Yeah, imagine dumping 20 billion in community colleges, right? To hire tenure track faculty who can teach classes of 15 people, but people whose daddy doesn't own like a giant
oil barons
or a sports franchise. Bringing that quality education to people, right? So the problem, and we have the capacity, we have people who have research degrees. We have overproduction, and we have tons of people working in shitty positions, but with the qualifications that you need to teach. So we could have a better organized higher education system that serves people, that allows people to get the quality education that they deserve locally without having to move to Boston. Why the hell should someone have to move to, you might want to move, right? But why should someone have to move away from their family, away from their community, in order to get a high quality education?
I don't think the function of higher education in America is to challenge the status quo, but it's actually to buttress the status quo.
Well,
I would say, yeah. Well, and even too, it's like
the way it is. That's why it's set up as a hierarchy. As Kuba says, the way Kuba uses the term PMC, which is the way I would agree, is that the PMC isn't just anyone with a credential, but is these people who come out of elite institutions and who get that social and cultural formation. In Britain, we have an equivalent. It's called a PPE degree. It's where you go do politics, philosophy, and economics, and you learn how to bullshit on a lot of different topics, but not have any deep knowledge on anything. And you go into these elite institutions, so you get the networks, so you can learn the vocabulary, and so you can become part of the ruling elite. Maybe not everybody gets in there. Maybe some people get to those universities on scholarships, so there is some kind of valve in which new blood can get into the degenerate ruling class of the country. But by and large, it's this hierarchy of university education is for the social reproduction of the existing class and political structures in the United States. And until one of the ways that we would get rid of that existing structure is to assault the structure of higher education, to create a more egalitarian system of higher education where people can gain access to high quality higher education on a multitudes of topics across the country, and thus putting to use the enormous wasted human capital of people who have studied and worked hard and who are working shitty jobs. And it's not just people in social sciences, it's people in the sciences who can't get good jobs. It's also people in business where people are told, go and do a business degree. But business degrees are the biggest way you get screwed over in student debt. You're better off doing a history degree and becoming a social studies teacher, because at least then you can kind of guarantee yourself a job. But in business, you get screwed over. And that's how people get screwed over, because you end up with you have this hustle culture, small business, black capitalism ideology, which encourages people to go to business school, get into debt, and if they don't, Yet the business that they wanted, they get screwed over with this massive student debt. That's what
Well, speaking of black capitalism, I wanted to shift a little bit. I have a clip that hasn't aired yet, and since we have some time today while we're waiting for our guests, and I have not showed my good friends on the show who I always show stuff to. Pascal and I are doing a series on Zero Books called The Dispatch, which is a video essay series. Two of Pascal's essays have been on, one of mine. And because I have this kind of network of really, really smart people, I asked Cedric Johnson if I could use an essay he wrote on Huey Newton called The Forgotten Huey Newton.
And all the smart people went to his high school.
There's a few. There's a few. Yeah. And so I wanted to play a little bit before it premieres on Zero. I don't know when it's going to premiere on Zero, but I also haven't sent it to Doug. So before I even send it to Doug, we're seeing it first. I'm not going to play the whole thing. I am going to play a little bit of it, but I gave it to Cedric. He finally responded to me with a text last night, and he said he loved it. And he said, I love the music. I love the clips you found, because I gotta dig deep for these fucking clips. I make sure they have less than 100,000 views when I find them, or I have to pay for them from archival sites. So here is the beginning of The Forgotten Huey Newton.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm Carl T. Rowan. As the new director of the United States Information Agency, I have the privilege to present to you a dramatic document of man's continuing search for dignity.
I plan to go on with our expansion, and also to make even a stronger tie with the struggling people of the world, because they represent 2/3 of the people. The colonized world, or the developing countries, are also the colored world, and American imperialism is implicated in all of those puppet governments that control these developing countries. In other words, if America withdraws its support from Greece, that Greek regime will fall. If America withdraws its support from the puppet government of South Vietnam, the Vietnamese war would end. So what I'm saying is we have to hook up internationally. You can only understand the situation internationally, and in order to do this, that we are going to commit troops. We're going to commit troops to the Vietnamese people, the National Liberation Front, to fight the cowardly American aggressor. The Black Panther Party.
In August 1970, Roy Wilkins, the sexagenarian leader of the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, used his syndicated column to criticize Huey Newton for urging the formation of an all-black fighting unit to assist the Vietnamese National Liberation Front. Newton co-founded the Black Panther Party for Self-Defense with Bobby Seale in 1966 and had recently been released on a technicality after spending 33 months in prison for the killing of Oakland police officer John Frey. Wilkins saw Black Power militancy as cynical and misguided. The Viet Cong may be hurting, Wilkins wrote, but nothing like the hurting of John Q. Black American. Of course, Huey knows about this suffering. It was the resentment over this treatment that led, at least in part, to the founding of the Black Panthers. But Huey, for all his talents, is also a revolutionary. Revolutionaries get confused. When he emerged from prison a month earlier, Newton addressed his supporters from atop the hood of a car. Wanting to bask in his newfound freedom, Newton took off his shirt, revealing a top frame, the reward of a punishing jailhouse regimen of push-ups. Young and defiant, he was the physical embodiment of the new militancy that contrasted sharply with Wilkins' graying demeanor and bourgeoisie comportment. And yet, in contrast to the popular image of the fiery Black black power. Or Newton was charming but soft-spoken, and his public speeches were delivered in a nasal, breathless tone and a more deliberative manner than the soaring rhetoric of his contemporaries like Eldridge and Stokely Carmichael.
The police are there not to, in our community, not to promote our welfare or for our security and our safety, but they're there to contain us, to brutalize us and murder us, because they have their orders to do so. Police in our community couldn't possibly be there to protect our property because we own no property. They couldn't possibly be there to see that we receive the due process of law for the simple reason that the police themselves deny us the due process of law. And so it's very apparent that the police are only in our community, not for our security, but the security of the business owners in the community, and also to see that the status quo is kept intact. When we first started, we had a police alert patrol, and we would patrol the community. If we saw the police brutalize anyone, we would put an end to this. Usually the police wouldn't brutalize anyone if we were on hand because we were armed, and if the police arrested the individual, we would follow him to the jail and bail the individual out, whether he was a Panther or not. And we would gain many recruits like this. So therefore the community started to say that, well, these people are really concerned about our welfare.
In his response to Wilkins' accusation of...
All right, that's all you guys get because we have to play the rest for 0 books.
Sounds funky, comrade.
What do you guys think so far?
The music is really nice.
That is the music that I used for our new clip as well. I made the music for the Huey Newton thing, and I make so many of these clips that I'm running out of fucking music that I made that I have to kind of sometimes reuse some of it. But it goes on to another whole song by the end of it. But it's about a 16, almost 17-minute video.
That's your first big 0 books documentary. So I want to congratulate you on joining the 0 books documentary movie family.
I am part of the documentary movie movement. But it looks like the person you guys have all been waiting for is finally here. Our guest is here. And before we bring our guest in, let's get the video ready for her introduction. Here we go.
Meanwhile, India's food problems continue to create widespread concern. Touring the famine areas, members of an unofficial American mission see for themselves the everyday conditions of life in southern India, a countryside on the very edge of starvation. Drought has added to the troubles of Madras, where large water tanks are completely dry. Desperately, the peasants try to deepen a well in the hope of finding water. Even rivers, once large, have shrunk to tiny streams. Cattle have to be driven for miles before they can quench their thirst. Another side of the grim story of India today.
The past decade has been one of turmoil and tumult for the United Kingdom. From economic austerity to Brexit, the country has limped and lurched from crisis to crisis. The outcome has been growing division, evidenced by the rise of Scottish nationalism and increased polarization between left and right. One important aspect of this trend towards national disintegration has been the increasingly ill-tempered cultural war stoked by the right-wing press and conservative government. As in the United States, part of this battle is being waged over history, with the Tory establishment and their allies at the Daily Mail and Telegraph whipping up hysteria about attacks on British heritage in response to critical academic studies on the country's imperial past. How does history feed into British national identity? How was the empire remembered? And what does the increasingly contentious nature of the public discussion pertaining to British history tell us about the state of British politics? We'll ask these questions and more. This is Revolution.
Tommy Robson, Belgium, bring on that, my friend. Tommy Okay, that's quite strongly put, but I think I get the idea. So, the English Defence League has been organising protests around the country in recent weeks. The first was here in the northeast. Police estimated that around 1,500 took part. Protesters were heard shouting, "Whose streets? Our streets." Tommy Robinson, leader of the EDL. You can assert until you're blue in the face that these are peaceful protests, but your supporters were heard shouting racist abuse. How do you explain that?
What racist abuse? You know,
I can't say it
we've just been talking
now
about
at this time on television.
We've been talking about racism. I'm from Luton Town. You're talking about racism, okay? There is no racial tensions in the town I come from. When David Cameron says multiculturalism has failed, Sikhism, Hinduism, Jews, they haven't failed to integrate into society. Islam has failed. When we talk against an ideology, if I'm against Scientology, are you going to call me a racist? I oppose the Islamist ideology. That does not make us racist. You can't talk about what we said that was racist because there was nothing said that was racist at the demonstration.
But we've read the quotes in the press.
Yeah, in the press. When you talk about the press, you just said 1,500 people there. There were 7,000 people there. So you've got a biased press that are misreporting.
So more people chanting.
More people chanting. More people at the demonstration. But what is the press's agenda to play that down? And then when we talk about Islamophobia, there is Islamophobia. Of course there is. There is Islamophobia because our police force actually were too scared to tackle grooming and rape of our youth because of fear of being called a racist. That's Islamophobia, not the Islamophobia. Phobia is an irrational fear, okay? It's quite rational to fear female genital mutilation of 2,000 British Muslim girls every year, terrorism like happened to Lee Rigby. Like 2 days ago, 6 Muslims who were sentenced to 19, 20 years each because they were planning to blow up the English Defence League due to the blasphemy law within the Quran. Okay, there's a link to all these things. The same with the Muslim grooming gangs. As a common denominator, you have to look for what the issue is, what links them all. They're all Muslim.
Speak for a minute, please, Tommy.
Of course, Mr. Robinson, there are no paedophiles who are white, and white people have never bombed anyone else's country.
87% of grooming cases are Muslim, yet 5% of the country is Muslim.
You spoke. Yeah. Let me speak. Now, this is exactly the issue, is what I'm saying, right? As much as I agree with what's being said about this man and his organisation, right? We focus on fringe bigots rather than dealing with the real central issue that we have a political system. I can't count how many times I've read the Daily Mail or some other paper, not that I read these rags, and it says Pakistani man does blah. When Jimmy Savile is convicted or something comes out about him, is his ethnicity or his religious beliefs put forward as the primary reason for him committing an offence? No. But we can of this kind of bigotry, right? And then act shocked when it comes up.
No one's prepared to explain what I've said that's bigotry.
One second. For those who don't know, Baghdad was the intellectual, cultural centre of mathematics and art and science about 1,000 years ago for quite a long time. No one blames Islam for that. So negative people who happen to be Muslim, yes, of course, it's your religion that causes it. But if you pioneer mathematics and science and introduce algebra into Europe and the guitar and coffees and lemons, that's not because you're Muslim.
All right. That was... The first time I saw Kala was that clip right there, and I fell down a rabbit hole of his work afterwards, and I really dig that dude. So hopefully we can get him on one day. But today we have Professor Priya Gopal, Indian-born public intellectual and writer who is a professor of post-colonial studies in the Faculty of English at the University of Cambridge. Please welcome Professor Priya Gopal. Thank you so much for joining us.
Happy to.
I read a few of your articles in The Guardian. Your latest. The latest one I could find was from March, but it's kind of in line with a lot of what we're talking about here as far as a re-examining of history. I did not know that Black people weren't allowed to box in the UK until the later 40s. Did not know that. And another reason why I do enjoy Kala's work is because he does have a pretty decent race and class analysis that we don't really get to hear too much from that UK perspective. So, Jean, did you have a question you wanted to ask right away? I know you're itching to ask a question.
Yeah, I wanted to thank Professor Gopal for agreeing to join us on This Is Revolution. It's a real honor. And I know she is one of the leading voices in the United Kingdom critiquing this sort of neo-empire nostalgia, something which I, who was brought up in the United Kingdom, also kind of feel very uncomfortable with.
Actually, before you ask your question, can we add? Someone says that Professor Gopal is a target. I didn't realize that they were spreading such a horrible lie about you with a tweet they said was from you, which wasn't even from you. It was from a site that was, I wouldn't say a joke site, but it just wasn't real. And was it the Daily Mail that ran with it?
Yes, there was a fake tweet, which was a quotation from Stalin, repurposed to make it sound like I was calling for white people to be eliminated from the face of the earth. And it was reprinted in the Daily Mail.
Yeah.
You got the George Chikarala Moore treatment. George, he was a professor who got canceled because they said that he made a statement to the effect that Dessalines in Haiti was correct to kill all the white people, which was actually, Dessalines did not kill all the white people. He killed all the French people. There's a difference. But he was saying that that was the right thing to do. And he basically got canceled from academia. So they tried to do a similar type accusation towards you.
And you want a bit of a settlement from that.
I won a very small, settlement from the Daily Mail after basically suing them. And they settled for a relatively small amount by their standards. But yes, they did have to apologize. And they also had to apologize for posting half a tweet by me, which again made it seem like I was devaluing white lives, which is not what I was doing.
I found the story, and I Googled you first. Gene didn't actually. I will say this: Gene does a great job of prepping us for shows because he does give us articles to read for whoever he brings on the show, right? I will say that. I will preface this by saying that I decided to just Google instead of using the work that a literal professor gave me.
And you can't trust the establishment.
Yeah. He's part of the PMC, right?
So am I.
So the first thing that pops up is the fake article that you won the lawsuit about. That is the first thing that comes up about you. And when Gene was pitching the show, he was saying that, hey, there's this woman that catches hell, but she is getting on the empire. And so then I found actually a video of you and a spoken word artist, a black fellow in the UK. It was actually a really
George the Poet.
Yeah, that was a really cool conversation you two had. That was actually really dope. So I'm first of all, I'm super excited. I'm going to shut up in a minute before I ramble way too much. So Gene, go ahead and ask your question. I will actually take my comments off here.
Yeah, so one of the things I wanted to ask you about is recent developments. So, at your college, Churchill College in Cambridge, there was recently, you were involved in a committee to reassess, Winston Churchill's views on race and empire. And I think a lot of people in the United States, have a kind of soft spot for Winston Churchill. He's kind of universally loved. And of course, in Britain, there's definitely a cult of Churchill. But of course, as those of us who are a little bit more proficient in history know, Winston Churchill was a profoundly racist, and for most of his career, pretty incompetent member of the British elite. And as far as I understand, I would like some clarification on this. Your working group was shut down. Is that correct? I've read places that it disbanded, but from my understanding, that's not what happened. So could you outline what the project was, and then if it's possible, why it was shut down and how it was shut down?
How much time do you have? Well, let me try and give you the short version. Last year, when the statue of the slave trader Edward Colston was pulled down in Bristol. There were also people who sprayed racist across the Churchill statue in London, near Parliament. Churchill College, where I have an affiliation, is the British nation's national memorial to Winston Churchill. And for many years, it has acted simply as one of the many sites where the cult of Churchill is perpetuated. So nothing negative, nothing critical, nothing even honest was ever said about Churchill within the confines of the college. So when the Churchill's statue got spray painted, the senior managers of the college, who are not known for taking my advice, suddenly decided that I was somebody to come to and ask what to do, given that Churchill was now being talked about as an object of protest. And I suggested to them that instead of waiting for protesters to turn up, why don't they lead the national conversation on Churchill and his relationship to race and empire? So initially they agreed, and we then proceeded to set up a working group, or the college set up a working group. I was a member of that working group, which was largely people of color, very unusual in Cambridge. And also it had Black students on it, again, very unusual in Cambridge. We had two events. One went off without much press notice. The second event was, I guess it was controversial even before it happened. And one of the reasons it was controversial is that all the speakers on the panel were speakers of color. There was the Asian scientist, Madhushri Mukherjee, the Black British academics, Kehinde Andrews and Onyeka Nubia, and me. And even before the event happened, the Daily Mail and other tabloids started to get anxious, and they printed big sensationalist stories saying panel is about to trash Winston Churchill's legacy. So they created a panic even before the event. Then the event took place. And after the event took place, there were again hysterical headlines about what had been said during the event. Nothing really that was said during the event is not known. It just tracked a long history of Churchill's racist actions and policies, and Churchill's great commitment to the empire. None of this is a news flash, but it didn't stop the tabloids going into overdrive. But things really got difficult when a right-wing think tank called Policy Exchange, which is close to the present government, issued a paper condemning the event, saying that it should never have been held, that the college should think twice before inviting speakers like the speakers on that panel, and that the series should not go ahead. And to my slight surprise, and I don't know why I was surprised, the college panicked. And in the weeks and months that followed, there were very bitter discussions between the working group and the college. And as the working group were preparing to resign, because the college, you just mentioned Akala in your previous video, the working group wanted to invite Akala to speak on Churchill, and the college vetoed that. They said he could come and he could speak on education, but he could not speak on Churchill or on the question of empire. Yes. Wow. And so the working group were preparing to resign when we got an email essentially firing us, saying, thank you for your service, goodbye. And that was basically the college disbanding the working group, but they didn't even have the courage to say, well, we disbanded the working group because we are, concerned about the backlash. then said the working group dissolved itself, and that never happened. So we are at this point where the working group has been disbanded, has been cancelled, if I might use the precise technical term, and we don't know what the future of the discussions around Churchill will be. So that's the short version.
Professor Prior, I wanted to ask you, in the context of the United States higher educational system, during the 60s, we had the Civil Rights Movement and the Black Power movement, and one of the demands of the Black Power movement was the increase of academic studies programs focusing on Black history or Black studies overall. Later on, that became kind of a part of a movement towards post-colonial or anti-colonial studies. Was there a similar type movement in that New Left period in Great Britain to include some type of counter-hegemonic narrative of Black or brown people, or as the famous term, the subaltern, into an institutionalized mechanism in higher education? Or has British education completely been devoid of any type of narrative of colonized people at all in an institutional capacity in the universities?
Yeah, that's a really very, very good question. I think that what happened under the sort of New Left movement, and of course the most famous figure adjacent to those discussions was Stuart Hall, producing vast amount of very, very brilliant commentary on race, empire, race relations, and the legacies of empire. But I think what didn't happen was all of this filtering into mainstream academia. And in fact, I think that I trained in the US and I came here about 20 years ago. And what struck me, having come from the US, was the complete absence of discussions of race and empire on campus. And I know that the situation in the US is very, very far from perfect, but it would be unimaginable that you would have a major Ivy League university with no Black professors. As things stand at Cambridge, and this is relatively recent, we have 2 Black professors, only one of whom is Black British. And across the nation, the representation of Black intellectuals in academia is shockingly small. We know that there are very, very, very few Black professors, that is full professors in academia. There are a couple of Black studies programs at Goldsmiths and at Birmingham, but Black studies, minority studies, third world studies, none of these have been properly integrated into British academia. What you also don't have, with the exception of people like Stuart Hall and Paul Gilroy and a very few others, is you do not have a large cadre of Black intellectuals in academia who can actually spearhead that change. So the short answer to your question is no. All those discussions that happened around the New Left, that happened with the Birmingham Center for Cultural Studies, that was happening on race and resistance and Black power in Britain, did not filter into academia. And it really is only with Black Lives Matter that we are starting to see academia suddenly wake up and think, oh my God, we have a problem. And that is the context in which this Churchill discussion both happened and was cancelled.
Well, I have a follow-up question to that, which is fascinating, because we had in America the introduction of these programs, and they were institutionalized. But one of the criticisms of those of us on the Black left, some would say Marxists or dialectical materialists, of the way in which those institutional mechanisms were integrated into higher education, is that they were functionally reifying liberal narratives of race and racism that eventually helped facilitate very neoliberal concepts of identity politics inclusion that did not challenge the hierarchies of capitalism in their eventual application. And my question to you is that since you didn't go through that intermediary phase of having those particular academic institutions, do you think it's valuable to analyze the critiques of Black and brown people on the left of how they were being used in terms of how you will advocate for those types of studies in your universities, as I see is beginning to be done now? I'd like to hear your thoughts on that.
I think that sometimes people on the left take a kind of maximalist position on this, which says, never mind diversity, never mind Black studies, this is all just liberal bullshit. Yeah, it's all liberal. It can become liberal bullshit. It can just become part of the menu of neoliberal options. But if the choice is between having neoliberalism with no Black and brown people and having neoliberalism with that gives enough of a platform to a range of people of color so that the anti-capitalist critique can at least be part of the discussion of race identity. I think that there is a sort of really weird tendency on the left to say it's all just diversity. Things don't work that way. We need decolonization, not diversity. But if you do not have, if you have a largely white institution, then you're not going to have race and class be part of a dialectical discussion in the way that it needs to be part of a dialectical discussion. So I think the left has some hard thinking to do. Yes, one would want to be utterly cautious and utterly vigilant about the neoliberal containment of race studies, of post-colonial studies, of diversity. But the fact is that post-colonial studies and Black studies have actually given many of us who do have anti-capitalist critique, who are cognizant of the relationship between race, class, and culture. It has made it possible for some of us to at least be able to bring that into academic discussion. So I don't hold with complete maximum. And if that means I have liberal sensibilities, then so be it. But I actually don't think that is the case. I think one has to actually think dialectically so that diversity is part of a dialectic. You stay vigilant and you keep the conversation critical and sharp.
No, I'm not taking a position either way, but I'm glad you're familiar with the debate and how it's being framed.
Who isn't?
And how we're going through it in America currently right now. But I was just interested in seeing how that's affecting the way the discourse is being framed.
Yeah.
In Great Britain, hoping that you guys would not have repeated some of the errors that we made in America with the same process.
I think that in Britain, and I go back to people like Stuart Hall, but many others, I don't think that discussions of race. We've got the Institute for Race Relations, which is one of the longest standing, most powerful centers for academic and scholarly and activist discussions of race and class. And the discussion has always been extremely alert to the dangers of certain forms of diversity and ethnic studies. But I don't think the answer can be to say, well, that's it. And so let's not do it. I think as one does, one enters institutions and then holds their feet to the fire and keeps the discussion going. I teach courses on decolonization, which discuss the problems with ethnic studies, with post-colonial studies, with diversity. And I think short of turning your back completely on academia, I don't think the answer is to say, this is all one big neoliberal trap.
So I wanted to sort of follow up on this question of academia and decolonization. So Pascal pointed out, and you sort of followed up on this, that Britain is in certain ways way behind the United States, at least in having some institutional fora in which these issues can be discussed. To what extent is that a legacy of the pre-existing academic structures that were created with the rise and expansion of the British Empire, and in particular the emergence of institutions like the School of Oriental and African Studies, Oriental Institutes, and places like that? I will say my DPhil is in Oriental Studies. So even though I do history, because it's history in which English is not the main language, I'm an Orientalist. To what extent were those pre-existing, because in America, area studies is basically a post-World War II phenomena. But in Britain, you have a long tradition going back to the 19th century. And, you have figures such as Bernard Lewis and things like that dominating fields about non-white, non-European people. So what extent were those academic structures responsible for retarding the development of these discussions in the United Kingdom?
That's a good question. I don't know if I have the full answer to that. I mean, you're quite right that the existence of area studies and ethnic studies, SOAS, Oriental studies, etc., are completely tied up to the empire and the empire's project of knowledge gathering and knowledge production and information gathering and ruling. I think that's absolutely right. And one of the consequences of that, of course, is that, and you would have seen this when you were at the Oriental Studies faculty, which is now known as Asian and Middle Eastern Studies, that it's very heavily dominated by white scholars and white men in particular. So I think that legacy is very much there. I think, however, that the discussion around race in Britain, race, class, gender, and the relationship between class and identity, capitalism and imperialism, these are a separate set of questions which largely got discussed outside academia. These discussions didn't happen within academia. And I'm not 100% sure that I would make a causal link between the existence of area studies programs or the kind of programs that you're talking about and the absence of the other. I just think that Britain took a long time, is still taking time, to acknowledge that the empire has come within. And that Britain today, if you want to talk about Britain today, you have to talk about empire and race in the present. And that discussion is only just getting going. I would say that the reason for the difference from the United States, where, as we know, area studies is connected to foreign policy, is CIA funded, I think still in many instances. Language training money comes from the State Department. I don't think that is the reason we don't have more recent discussions of race and empire in academia. I just think that America has a much longer history of civil rights campaigns and many, many more prominent Black intellectuals than does Britain. And that may have to do with the class profile of immigrants to Britain as well.
Can you speak to that, about the class profile of the immigrants, how that affects the discourse as well? I.e., are they elites from the African subcontinent, Indian subcontinent, and that's changing, that's affecting their willingness to critique empire?
No, I rather meant that actually, since we were talking about academia and why certain kinds of discussions are not happening in universities or on campuses, it's actually the other way around. Most South Asian immigrants to Britain, as well as from the West Indies, often came here to do low-paid manual jobs. So Windrush famously, is that generation from the Caribbean. And you had people from Pakistan and India coming here to do, again, to be part of working class communities. And what has happened, and they were brilliant, and they campaigned and they fought for their rights, and they were part of protest culture in the 70s and 80s. But that particular mode stayed separate from academia. Academia was and continues to be white middle class dominated. In the US, I guess there is a a longer history, more generations of communities of color who have found representation of some kind, small, in academia.
Well, we also have the phenomenon of historically black colleges and universities.
Yes, absolutely.
In the United States as well, which kind of helped that proliferation also.
Yes.
And also the nature. I mean, of course, we know that this racism and the British are notoriously racist, but having plantation systems in the country in terra firma kind of differentiates the way race is operationalized in the United States as opposed to Britain in a certain way. So I think that kind of adds a nuance to it as well.
Yes.
And I have a question, especially in this is kind of dealing with the recent soccer, the Euros game, and this is actually a phenomenon that I've witnessed here in the United States. So I do live in Maine, which is one of the the whitest state in all of the the 50 states. There is a community though that had a lot of Somali refugees back in I think 2015, 16-ish. And a lot of at first there's a whole lot of racism, a lot of oppression going on, a lot of just the community not really supporting. And then comes 2019 where the high school team is all of a sudden winning the state soccer championships. And you look at the team, it doesn't exactly look like a team from Maine. But you also have this type of thing in the UK where at the beginning of the Euros, you see a lot of success, and all of a sudden, Britain has cured its racism problem because we're allowed to cheer for a team that's winning. But as soon as the loss happens in the championship, you see this resurgence. But I guess my question would be of what do you see as the role in academia to point to these instances as a large scale to, point out to the UK that we have not solved this and actually need to do a deeper dive because, racism is not, just a U.S. problem by any means. And I think.
Yeah. I mean, it is really interesting the ways in which young people here responded to Black Lives Matter in the US. And this is why, in a way, I think it is quite important to undo some of the barriers between academia and wider activism. And there is young people who have made the connection between, say, police violence in the US and in Britain, and the racialized nature of the way in which the state operates. They have made the connections between campaigning and activism on race and racism to the British educational system, which has absolutely let them down. And I would say there is even less discussion of the empire in Britain than there is of slavery in the United States. Slavery in the United States might generate a large number of divisions and positions, but nobody is completely ignorant of it. Whereas in the United States, in the United Kingdom, you can go through your entire education, your school and college education, and never have read a single thing about the empire and literally know nothing. And certainly right now, the generation of students that I'm engaging with are very, very angry. They're very angry about the fact that they don't have the education and the equipment and the tools to think about what is happening in the present. And they are very, very keen to say, actually, police violence isn't just happening in the United States. We want to talk about race and empire in the present, and our educational system needs to step up to the plate.
And I wanted to read this excerpt of your article in The Guardian from a few months back. You say, a baleful silence attends one of the most talked about figures in British history. You may enthuse endlessly about Winston Churchill, quote unquote, single-handedly defeating Hitler, but mention his views on race or his colonial policies, and you'll be instantly drowned in ferocious and orchestrated vitriol. In a sea of fawningly reverential Churchill biographies, hardly any books seriously examine his documented racism. Nothing, it seems, can be allowed to complicate, let alone tarnish, the national myth of a flawless hero, an idol who saved our civilization, as Boris Johnson claims, or humanity as a whole, as David Cameron did. make an uncomfortable observation about his views on white supremacy, and the likes of Pierce Morgan will ask, why do you even live in this country? I found that very, very relevant because I feel like a lot of the same conversation happens here. To your point, even about slavery, there's a show, I want to say it's on the Peacock network, which is the online NBC. So, we're talking major network television here about how they examine the Civil War in like high school, and high school age students not even understanding what the Civil War was really about.
Yeah.
So reading your writing on Churchill, and to your point, and I think Gene probably agrees with this too, there's not a lot on Churchill and the famine in India in the early to late 40s. I actually was going to start the video off with it was some footage I had never seen of the northern Indian region was really bad, the Bengali region.
Bengal, yeah, northeast.
And unfortunately it was in the language, and there's no one I have access to at 2:00 in the morning my time to ask are they saying, to get some sort of translation. But it was a lot more accurate portrayal of what was happening. And I think what is Churchill known for saying about the famine? It wouldn't be so bad if they didn't breed like rats.
Yeah, breed like rabbits. Yeah.
I mean, amongst Kurds, there was a huge debate over whether the Royal Air Force, which was the main mechanism through which the Iraqi monarchy maintained power in the 90s, whether they used poison gas against Kurds or not. Because of course Saddam Hussein famously used poison gas against Kurds. And it turns out, from what I understand from the research, is that the RAF did not use poison gas, but Winston Churchill did suggest that the RAF used poison gas against the Kurds, even though they didn't deploy it. And I think this is really important. I'd like to get Professor Gopal's opinion on this. It strikes me, as I did my schooling in Britain, in Hull, I did history. Britain lives in 1940. Like, if you do history at a British high school, it's just about like how Britain heroically stood up against the Nazis, how everybody had to live in Anderson shelters, and there was the Blitz spirit. And Churchill is this titanic figure. But in a double way, the cult of Churchill obfuscates the reality, and I mentioned this earlier on the show, that Britain's ability to survive against the Nazi war machine in 1940 was predicated on the existence and exploitation of the British Empire, not only the white dominions, but the manpower and material of Africa and the Indian subcontinent and things like that. So on one hand, we are ignoring Churchill's quite bigoted and racist past, and people get triggered by it. But it's like, there's this slogan in America, facts don't care about your feelings. But apparently a lot of these conservatives have very big feelings when you mention that, hey, Churchill was a racist. Hey, people of color served in the war. Hey, this lovely mansion was built with the blood of slaves. Or like, hey, India is not just the Indian Raj was not just this lovely sort of, where they always have the sepia filter on the camera, and like there's all these beautifully dressed British people having tea party and drinking Pimm's. It's actually a quite brutal institution. How does the kind of cult of Churchill in the Second World War serve to, let's say, obfuscate empire, and how does it fit into like the national myth building? Because it seems this was always implicit in Britain, but it seems in the last 10 years this is really in your face. And the fact that you get so many attacks, I think Niall Ferguson called you the woke Torquemada or something like that. The fact that you get so much attacks for just outlining factual history really speaks to like how this has become like a huge kind of cultural battleground, perhaps akin to the way that slavery and the Civil War is playing a similar role in the culture war in the United States. I see a lot of parallels.
Yeah, I think you're right to see the parallels. And the main parallel, I think, is this, that both the US and the United Kingdom have refused to engage with their history. Both educational systems prefer mythology. I take the point that you made and people in the comments are making about students not actually knowing what the Civil War was about. I think that in both cases there is a preference to actually not reckon with, let's face it, the blood legacies of empire and of the Native American genocide and slavery in the United States. Neither country engages with slavery, although I know I keep saying this. I actually think that the engagement with slavery, all thanks to the civil rights movement and the presence of African American outspoken African Americans, that there is still a little bit more discussion of slavery in the United States than there is in Britain. People are quite happy to say Britain isn't the country that did slavery. Britain is the country that abolished slavery. I mean, it is the most bonkers position you can take, and yet it is widely espoused that we are not the nation who enslaved, but we are the nation who abolished. So I think the levels of myth-making in this country around empire are absolutely shocking and serious. So any attempt to push at the mythology, it brings out disproportionate hysteria. I mean, there is no other word for it. You just say Winston Churchill and race, and you might not even have said he was a racist. You might just say we want to talk about empire and race, and you will get ferocious pushback. I mean, I have a mailing bag this big thick of people saying, if you don't like Churchill, leave. And that's quite astonishing, because it is saying essentially that you can stay in this country only if you accept A, that Winston Churchill could do no wrong, and B, the empire could do no wrong. And those two things are related. I mean, Churchill isn't Churchill. Churchill is a placeholder for Britain's victory in the Second World War, where very conveniently we have this notion that Britain kind of struggled alone, led by Churchill, right? Even the United States and the other allies are not given credit, and certainly there's no mention of the Soviet Union and the role played by the Red Army in the liberation of Germany. So I think there's a long, long way to go, and any pushing at the mythology elicits backlash, because what they don't want is history. There is a real anti-historical tenor to public discussions in Britain.
I had a question I wanted to ask, because this is fascinating to me. So what that would mean is that the history of Afro-British counter-hegemonic scholarship, Walter Rodney, Eric Williams, C.L.R. James, is that completely obfuscated in the intellectual tradition of British discourse, thought? I mean, how can you not, interface with these well-known scholars? I mean, how are they dealt with?
I mean, they're not absent, but they're ghettoized. So if you take a class with if you take a class with me, you will read Rodney and C.L.R. James. If you don't take a class with me, it is perfectly possible to get a degree in history or in English from a major university and never have read C.L.R. James or Walter Rodney or Frantz Fanon or Amilcar Cabral. No, the black radical tradition is very much on the margins of discourse. And I was very struck when my book Insurgent Empire came out a couple of years ago, and it goes back and it looks at figures like George Padmore and Claude McKay, C.L.R. James, and young people, just came up to me and said, "My God, we had no idea. This is kind of mind-blowing." And I have had to explain to them that I'm just one in a fairly long tradition of intellectuals and writers engaging with these figures. But that tradition is utterly and completely marginalized, which is why I say that it is important for academia to expand to include people who will and can teach these traditions.
And there was a deliberate attempt, I think, to mischaracterize what most people mean when they say decolonizing the syllabus. It is not about like kicking people off the syllabus. It is about adding new voices to the syllabus. You know, I think there's a lot of dishonesty in the way that the British press and the media is framing these debates, and it's being aided and abetted by, you know, Niall Ferguson and his acolytes and those kind of people who are empire apologists, like literally empire apologists. I read his book on empire. I read his, what was the other one, Colossus. Is just pure apologetics for what was an extremely brutal and violent system of government. And they all, you know, it is, you know, it beggars belief sometimes. And so, you know, it's very interesting to see how, at least in the last 10 years, these more critical views of empire are coming to the mainstream. Like, I believe you were named one of the top 50 influential public figures recently, in which news publication did that? I can't remember. But it's because people have never, you know, it's because these conversations have been had within circles, but they seem to be now infiltrating the mainstream discourse. And it seems to be, you know, what does it tell us about British politics? I mean, it strikes me, for example, and I'm kind of like riffing here, that a lot of the discussion of Brexit, particularly on the like Leave side, was framed in this kind of like, on one hand, World War II, like you had a bunch of boomers and Gen Xers who were acting as if like resisting the European Union was somehow resisting Hitler in 1940. You have all this vocabulary of Churchill, the Churchill bulldog spirit, empire, and all this kind of stuff. So on one hand, and then this kind of notion that if we leave the EU, we'll go back to trading with India and all these other colonies that we used to have, as if those countries have fond memories. Even the white dominions don't like Britain that much anymore. Yeah. So you know, it seems like there's a mass delusion about empire, and sort of puncturing that imperial fantasy is also puncturing this very pernicious right-wing political project that is being sold to the British public, and you know that was used to eliminate Corbynism, that has been used to like attack people. And at the same time, this Tory government, on the flip side, is bringing up people of South Asian origin to like high positions in the government. So we have the lovely Priti Patel, we have our Chancellor of the Exchequers, who are acting as like kind of spokesmen for this imperial nostalgism. Even though I don't know if this is correct in most cases, I think most of these South Asians in the conservative movement, and I may be wrong, come from the Indian diaspora in Africa. There are people who fled Idi Amin and stuff like that. Would that be a fair assessment as well in terms of? So there's a lot of points I had in there. But it seems we have this bizarre political discourse that is centering around an empire that died 2 generations ago.
Yeah, except it hasn't died. It lives as a zombie. It has an afterlife, a very toxic afterlife. As correctly said, it absolutely shaped Brexit. The idea that Britain could lead the world without having to defer to Europe was right out of the empire playbook. I'm glad you brought up the people in cabinet and the whole question of how they are part of the imperial mythology, which is also about the present. I don't know if all of them are of African descent. In fact, I don't think that is entirely the case. There are certainly many whose family histories rooted them through Africa. But I think it is really important for Black, Asian, and other ethnic minority communities in Britain to talk about the history of collaboration and the ways in which empire was not a project where it was just a bunch of bad white people and innocent Black and Asian people, but that actually empire is a system that requires collaboration, that absolutely relies on, in this case, Black and Asian friends and facilitators. And I think Boris Johnson's cabinet is a glaring and almost marvelous example of how Black people of color are used to facilitate a racist state's actions. In fact, in Priti Patel's case, undertakes them on behalf of the state.
She's like literally the, I guess people would know it as the Minister of Interior, just for our viewers. She's the Home Office Minister, which is the person, I guess, would be the equivalent of Homeland Security and the Attorney General, and all these positions rolled into one super ministry, just so our viewers are aware.
I think the closest comparison would be Condoleezza Rice, perhaps, that sort of very, very ambitious woman of color who is absolutely and utterly happy to follow the state's white supremacist and imperialist playbook.
We have liberal versions of that as well. I would say Obama, Kamala Harris, we have them on both flanks in the United States.
Susan Rice, especially being, one of those representations for the Democratic Party. I do have a question too, because it's like I don't know if you'd agree, but I'm sensing some parallels in just kind of like the feelings and some of these narratives that the United States population would have with like the founding fathers. Would you see that type of similar like veneration with Winston Churchill? Because even these like little qualms of like, oh hey, George Washington had wooden teeth and bared through the winter storm, so it was like, no, these were slaves' teeth, and all of these people were slave owners, and like all of these things that like, yeah, you can't even get it was a time, or they just can't even bring it up whatsoever and talk about these people as human beings. Are almost like deified to some level.
Yeah, I think Winston Churchill has the status probably of Lincoln. So he, the father of the nation. He isn't called that. He is repeatedly referred to as the greatest Briton of all time, and there was a poll which voted him that. So yeah, he's completely the symbol of the nation in a way which even Shakespeare is not.
So who would you say the greatest Briton of all time?
Called that?
Sorry, I missed that question.
Go ahead. Sorry, Gene. Sorry.
No, you go ahead, Jason.
I just say, can you imagine Andrew Jackson being called that, the greatest president of all time?
I think someone wrote a book about Jackson who literally said that, as a matter of fact. There was a biography. There are historians.
Breitbart?
There are historians that are very profound advocates of Andrew Jackson. He has, he has a certain kind of, because don't forget, Jackson is considered the one who really turned America into a democracy by giving the voting rights to non-landowning white males. So he was like the first like proletarian president in the eyes of some people. But there is a mythology around Andrew Jackson in various history departments. That, I think you'd have to be a total reactionary to buy into that, but this is a reactionary country, so it's not surprising. But I wanted to ask you, Professor Gopal, about the effect of the phenomenon we have in America, the discourse around critical race theory, the Great Awakening, all of this kind of contemporary resurgence of race discourse or racial grievance discourse, reparations, et cetera, so on and so forth, who, from my understanding, the way it's being used in the West by the neoliberal faction of the Democratic Party is very cynical. But how exactly is that affecting this contemporary phenomenon that you're talking about in Great Britain right now? You may use Black Lives Matter as a conduit as well.
There have been parallel discussions in Parliament about what they are calling critical race theory. They obviously, they have no idea what the term means. It is used to stand in for any discussion of white supremacy, the empire, and race. So anyone like me or others academics who take a critical position on any of these issues, very, very different kinds of academics, is denounced as a CRT practitioner. So we know that critical race theory is not something that is particularly understood or used in a particularly literate way. It is used as a placeholder, not just to shut down discussions of race, but to also shut down the left broadly, very, very broadly conceptualized. It could mean left liberals and it could mean actual communists. But the idea is that the woke, as they call it, span the spectrum from anti-racists to kind of merely liberal on matters of inclusion. So anybody who is not actively right-wing on these questions is deemed to be a dangerous practitioner of CRT. And there are moves afoot to ban the discussion of what they're calling CRT in schools, but what they mean is any discussion really of race.
Right. So what you're saying is that the same absolutely reactionary right-wing trend that we're seeing in states like my own state, like Florida, where they're passing legislation to literally ban discussions about racism.
Mm-hmm.
That is being replicated. There are attempts to replicate that in Great Britain.
I'm not just saying that. Let me also go one step further. I am saying that there is American money behind it. I know from...
That's fine.
I know from discussions... because in the case of people like me, it is a matter also of personal security and of knowing what is going on. There have been multiple calls for me to be fired. They may end up being successful one of these days. So has Kehinde Andrews also dealt with that kind of thing. Other people have had disciplinary action. And one thing that is becoming increasingly clear to me is that there is dark money and kinds of money coming in to enable culture warriors to function on campuses, to use the free speech banner under which to conduct their version of culture wars. I don't think it's just a bunch of guys who got up one day and decided to fight a cultural war. I think it's pretty systemic, and I don't think that the US and the British models are happening parallel but separate. I think they're connected, and I am, yeah.
No, go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, I was just going to say that there is a money trail. We don't know when it will be found out and when we will have the details, but there is no doubt in my mind that there is a money trail. So, for instance, the big pro-empire project at Oxford, run by Thatcherite and very, very right-wing theologian Nigel Biggar, he had funding for his institute, which was essentially a project of recovering the empire and writing another mythology of how great it was. That very explicitly has funding links to the United States by the sounds of it. Today, I don't know if it's today or tomorrow, Fox News is going to be carrying a man called Bruce Gilley, who wrote an article termed "The Case for Colonialism."
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
And Bruce Gilley is very, very close to Nigel Biggar and others. So the links between the US and Britain here are very, very intimate.
It's interesting. I wanted to bring something up, and I'll shut up, Gene.
No.
I'll cut you off. Someone in the chat brought up the movie Shaka Zulu, and I don't know if you guys in the UK grew up with Shaka Zulu. I don't even know if Pascal remembers this, but where I grew up in California, maybe every other month it came on television, and this is I'll be 44 this year, so this is in the right in the middle of apartheid South Africa, right? This is the early to mid 80s, and this is an article about Shaka Zulu being aired on an LA TV station. From the LA Times in '86. Shaka Zulu is a gory, foolish, and demeaning 10-hour miniseries airing on KCOP, channel 13 at 8 p.m., Monday through Wednesday. Shot in South Africa, it seems to shape history to fit a contemporary political theme. Yesteryear supposedly bloodlusting Zulus fill nearly every frame of Shaka Zulu, becoming a negative metaphor for today's Black South Africans, reinforcing a wild tribal image in contrast to civilized whites. So that's why I think it's like really important what you're bringing up here, as far as the way we're viewing empire in both of our countries, and it's so fascinating that you also did your studying here too. I love your perspective.
That's interesting. So you're saying that they're saying that Shaka Zulu was actually a counter-revolutionary film that was trying to negatively affect the South African freedom movement by contemporarily depicting South African Zulus as kind of savage, kind of uncivilized beings? Is that
to think about this? That movie's made in '64, but it comes
later than that. It was made later than that.
Okay, 79. I mean, it wasn't made when it was coming out, and for it to be airing so regularly that it's just it's built into my psyche now because it came on so much.
Right.
And I don't know anybody that watched Shaka Zulu that really even understood the story of Shaka Zulu. It was just Africans running around, barely clothed, and white people intelligently pontificating on the Negro problem.
Well, there's a whole load of movies. Like, there's all these movies from the 60s and 70s, you know, like Khartoum, you know, Zulu, all these kind of like empire fantasy movies where it's like some British officer going out and having to deal with the like nameless masses of black and brown people.
Oh, what's the famous one about Saudi Arabia? Lawrence of Arabia.
Lawrence of Arabia.
Yeah, like you know, and they still make them. They make that stupid movie about what's her name? Herzog made a movie about Gertrude Bell, British spy and agent, who incidentally met my great uncle. And said my great uncle was a very boring tribal leader. And apparently, I've been told my great uncle said his biggest regret was not putting a bullet in her when he had the opportunity. So you know, this is something. But I want to get back to the dark money thing because I think this is really important. Like we know, for example, Spiked, right? And someone mentioned it in the chat. But this isn't Spiked is getting caught by the money, and Spiked is one of these really, you know, like it's like post-left. It's one of these post-left. Kind of reactionary things, and you know that's a thing that's growing in Britain. But I think it's really, and I see this with my friends, my regular friends, like with the dark money, with the social media. It seems like the British and American sort of Anglosphere is merging into one giant culture war, where you like I have friends in Kingston upon Hull who have never been political, who are now like obsessed with QAnon, and they believe there's a giant pedophile cult, you know, spreading around. This is like a very pernicious thing, and so I think it's a really important. And I seem to remember, and maybe I'm wrong, Professor Gopal, but like a lot of the people who attack you are Trump accounts, right? They're not like just British people. You get attacked by Trump accounts as well.
By the way,
yes, I mean last year. Sorry. Yeah, go ahead.
This is also happening. This is not just an Anglo phenomenon because France is dealing with this as well, as a matter of fact. Because don't forget, this is like the year of Napoleon in France, and there have been many. There's a well-known Haitian scholar out of the University of Virginia. Her name is Marlene Doe, and she wrote a piece in the New York Times. Basically, the whole title of the piece is like why Napoleon was not a hero. So this kind of glorification of empire as well is something that even the French are doing right now with the 200th anniversary of, I think, Napoleon's birth or something like that.
This is something where, like, I wonder too if especially for one thing, I'm curious as to what type of association the left or liberal, or especially liberal parties are with academia in the UK, because like in the US, you know, the Democratic Party and academia are kind of seen as like this together, or like co-conspirating, you know, liberal, you know, force. But also too is like, how does the actions of, right? So I think that there's a failure critique of any type of like real discussion of like imperialism, racism done as far as done within like the liberal Democratic Party, and thus an extension to sometimes in like academic circles, dealing with the Iraq War, dealing with the war in Afghanistan. Do you feel like there is I guess especially like Tony Blair, being the Labor MP, and then also supporting George Bush in some of these just illegal wars, does that hurt? Does it hurt you and other people in academia being able to actually talk about imperialism when even like the quote unquote left establishment agrees with more empire and more,
Yeah, I mean, I don't think the terrain of the relationship between the two main parties and academia is quite the same as in the United States. I mean, I think I did attend a parliamentary discussion, a parliamentary group discussion on decolonizing the curriculum, which had the shadow minister for education and schools present. And she talked supportively in a sort of very general way about the need to talk about the empire and so on and so forth. But I don't think that Labour is particularly under Starmer, is especially part of these discussions. And if they did take a position, as for instance, Starmer took a very, I would say, probably a reactionary position on taking the knee. I mean, he tried to couch it in being in kind of vague strictures, but I don't think Labour is as intimately connected to these discussions, really. And there is no spectrum here beyond Labour and the Tories.
I mean, I guess, and that's something though that's like, is that even a contradiction within Labor at all? Is that ever brought up in like, as far as like Tony Blair being the willing participant of the coalition of the willing without not asking hard questions? And I think from my outside looking in, and like I do a lot of research as far as going on to like the military industrial complex, that has been incredibly strengthened based off of these forever wars, to the tune where even during, this pandemic, they're still able to push and push for bills to significantly increase the military spending for the UK. I just kind of wonder how those things play out and tie into each other, especially with, a more, hopefully, a more invigorated talk about imperialism with, that's coming on, largely because of your work.
I mean, there are a lot of people talking about imperialism, and I'm not at all the only person doing work on it. I think that the discussion around Tony Blair and present-day imperialism, present-day kind of American military adventures and so on, I think that discussion is pretty much taken a back seat to internal fights. And I think that the more significant discussion now, and it's the most significant division, I think, within Labour as well, is the post-Brexit consensus on the so-called white working classes, and the idea that there are working classes who are specifically marginalized because of their whiteness. And I think that the Starmer incarnation of the Labour Party is very keen to be seen to be as behind what it calls the white working class as the Tories are. And so I think what's happening now is that Labour, a significant chunk of Labour, and certainly Starmer's Labour, is talking a very racialized game on class. And there is a real danger there that the reification of this notion that there is a particular northern white worker who is alienated by virtue of being white. And I think that right now the discussion isn't in fact on empire and imperial foreign policy, but it is on class divisions and discussion and sort of who was behind Brexit and who should Labour be catering to. I think that's the discussion ongoing.
It seems though that strategy has entirely failed, because on one hand, Labour seems to have alienated the activist base that coalesced under Jeremy Corbyn. It's alienated young people, but it has failed to win over any significant portion of the so-called white working class. And I would make this kind of addendum. A lot of what, and I'm from the north of England, and I would say I would know the north of England pretty well, and Hull is about as north of England as you can get. And Hull was actually one of these places, these Tories 5 years ago were saying, like, we should just pay people to leave Hull because it's such a dump, right? But now pretending that they care about it. But it seems like, compared to America, the British Tories are playing the national conservative card a lot more effectively than the Republican Party, because the Tories do splash cash around. You know, they haven't got like libertarian economic brain disease like the Republicans do. But it seems that a lot of the discussion of the working class is not about working class people. It's about people who have small businesses. It's about the Mittelstand of North England, people who are all, you know, white van man owned his own van, right? You know, so yeah. I think this Labour seems to have lent into a cultural war with it, but is totally being annihilated, you know, by that cultural war, which they think they can out flag shag the Tories, which they can't.
Yeah, no, they can't. And so, you know, in that sense, it's a classic mistake. If you want to vote for, you know, flag shagging and right-wing economic policies and with a lash of white supremacism, why not go straight to the mother lode, the Tories? Why would you vote for Starmer, who isn't actually providing any kind of opposition? Somebody in the chat describes Starmer's Labour as controlled opposition, and that's right. It's an official opposition, and it is serving, in a sense, to pretend opposition. But the failure to oppose is absolutely stunning. It is really striking at a time, and you know, last year when the Tories were clearly mismanaging the pandemic, there was really not significant opposition from Labour. And what the Tories have very cleverly done is take economic ideas from the left. So you actually plow money into the pandemic. You put money into furlough. You put money into developing a vaccine. These are all actually ideas taken from the left and repurposed. And that's, again, where I think the Republicans and the Tories are different.
So it seems like the Labour Party in England is going the way of the Clintonian Third Way movement of the DLC in terms of trying to appropriate as much kind of right wing in the corporatist form as possible in their agenda to appeal to this disaffected white working class, which is exactly what the Democrats did in the late 80s, early 90s, which facilitated their shift to hardcore neoliberalism as well. So is it kind of like the Labour Party is doubling down on the Tony Blair, on a Blairite strategy in some way? Would that be a fair assessment?
I think broadly. I mean, as you say, I think Blair was the Clinton of Britain, and it is a return to that moment. So it's or an attempted return to what a lot of people on the Labour front benches think of as the glory days of the late 90s and the early millennium.
I mean, I think we could look at Biden's presidency as you know, kind of like the similar resurgence of that, right?
I don't necessarily know if I would make that assessment, because Biden was a neoliberal before they were neoliberals. I mean, he was Clinton before Clinton, and he's not governing in a classical neoliberal economic model.
Anyway. I mean, would this be correct to say that? And I've heard this, you know, from the British perspective, right? Biden actually looks pretty good to people on the center left of Britain, because Biden, the left in Britain, the Labour Party is waging a war against the party's left, and an increasing, you know, all these people who are like sabotaging Corbyn are now crying about unity. Whereas, although there is, of course, still like attempts to get rid of progressives in the Democratic Party, there's a little bit of money being thrown around. There's a little bit of kind of at least symbolic sops being given to the left. So from the British perspective, I mean, yeah, like Biden looks like really good. I hear people who are on the left going like, well, it's not like in America where, you know, Bernie Sanders has some influence in things. So Biden looks good from the UK.
Well, and that's, but I think where I find a big issue with that, like, even like finding that is that like where Bernie Sanders right now is making his influence legislatively is securing small healthcare wins that, you know, the UK has had for decades. And so it's like, so in some of this policy areas, we are digging ourselves out of a hole. And it is kind of like an apples to oranges type of thing. It's in some policy areas, right? And others, you know, you could reverse it and say, well, you know, the United States spending and involvement in warfare in the military industrial complex completely outblows, you know, the UK, whereas like Labor could say, hey, this is not something that we actually need to maybe invest too much of our time in, where I would say the US left, that should be one of the most substantial, you know, places to work on.
Well, on that note, we have been on air for over 3 hours.
I didn't mean to get the last word. I'm sorry.
Well, you win the last word battle. You know what? In all fairness, Marcus, if there's one person that never gets the last word, you never get the last word.
All right. This is reparations. I appreciate it.
There you go. Reparations. Every little bit counts.
Yeah.
Thank you so much to our esteemed guest.
Thank you.
Priya Gopal. I put links in the description of the show to
I hope you'd be willing to come back again at some time in the future if you know to further this discussion, Professor Gopal.
Absolutely. I've enjoyed talking to you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for coming on. It's been a real pleasure and honor.
Going on. We really appreciate you.
Take care. Thank you. Bye.
Have a good day or evening. That was Professor Priya Gopal.
Very righteous conversation.
That was a fun. Thank you guys for doing the show. I do want to add that we have to use the weekends as a way to get our guests that live in different countries, because our show at night is or 6 p.m. my time is like 2 a.m. their time, so we have to fit this in on the weekends. So it is a little harder to get this, and because we start the show at 9 or noon wherever you are, you can't just start them willy-nilly anytime, then you guys won't watch anymore. So thank you guys all for sticking with us during our
marathon.
It was a marathon show. We haven't done a 3-hour show in a long time.
Pascal had a nap in the middle of it, though, so he's fine.
You know, we got to give Pascal a break. He's been doing the rounds. He's been, you know, jet setting. He's been on, you know, all the things, Peacock, the Majority Report, Bad Fate, you know, like, yeah. Okay. Hey, Pascal, I tried to help you out.
Where's Pascal going to be next? Where are we going to be able to see you next, Pascal?
One of your contacts reached me out for a podcast to do his show.
The Highland Bunker guys?
Yeah, I got to reach out
cool
to them.
guys. They're cool guys.
Pascal is on everybody's show, and it's kind of.
And I also did a panel Wednesday.
What's dope though is that because Pascal is on everyone's show, I never get asked. So.
Oh, here we go.
Wait, no.
I'm not mad about that at all. I'm actually quite I'm totally okay with that.
Jason, I'll say I appreciate you not getting too big for my show or our show that we do on Tuesdays. I appreciate that. Pascal was like, listen, Brianna Joey Gray got better hair than you do.
Yeah.
It's better hair than you do, Marcus.
Hour difference.
So you expect me to do the 2 to 3 o'clock hour.
It's okay.
Like
Look,
that.
Brianna Joy came out looking like Patrice Rushen in 1981, and all you could hear was "Send me forget-me-nots." And
oh yeah, who's gonna? Yes, who's? Here The Pascal Hour with Pascal Robert featuring Jason Miles. Music by Jason Miles. The Mau Mau Hour. I told you guys, my son said Mau Mau for the first time today.
Oh, they grow up so quick.
When you sent that message, I could see Pascal smile.
I thought that was rather warm and charming.
Somebody said Brianna Joy Gray looked pretty good in their honest opinion. Look, man, we never said the woman was not attractive. We're just saying that she used that attractiveness to lure past.
Oh, stop it! Shut up.
Jason, that's very close.
Nigga, what?
Unnecessary left drama.
Yeah, that's how you get the clicks.
I'm making faux left drama. There is no drama.
No, but it was a great interview. Honestly,
a great host.
It was a good panel.
Great conversation.
Because you know why? We're all friends, right?
She was very nice. She was very nice.
She asked the good questions. You can tell she's professional. She's very professional.
Very good. I'm telling you right now, man. She's a cool sister, man. I have no complaints.
Of course you don't. Because she was looking like Patrice Rushen.
Oh, here we go. I invited her on our show. She said she would love to come on our show. There you go.
What date is she coming? We got some open dates to fill.
I'm going to set her a date.
Be while I'm on vacation.
Oh, wow.
No, actually, we're going to try to do it when you're not on vacation.
Sure, Pascal.
This fucking motherfucker in this damn South.
You know what's going to happen. I'm going to be gone. And that's when, like, Brianna Joy Gray comes on.
Yeah.
And she's going to replace you, Jason. She's going to replace you. Or maybe
y'all are all starting all kinds of paranoid smack, man.
This is bad revolution.
First of all, how many times did I say the word
revolution?
There's an important comment for you in the comments from Colin. It says you should check out Fred Hampton Leftist if you haven't, Jason. That would be also something.
I've seen a couple episodes.
What I was going to say is that, do you know how many times I promoted This Is Revolution podcast while I was on the show?
She edited those out.
No, she did not.
Every time it's like, and I'm also on the show. This is Bad Faith Podcast, brought to you by
Well, remember, let's get serious. Remember, everybody should like the video, leave a comment, would be super helpful. Subscribe.
Yes, please like today's show, leave a contact.
Please look here. This is what happens. So it's 12:22 my time. I'm already 20 minutes late for my 40-minute drive to go to my 12-year-old sister's birthday. I'm 32 years older than my 12-year-old sister.
This was a good show. Even the pre-guest segment
was great.
It was a great show. We really had fun. Thanks.
I was not worried about being able to fill that time. I have extremely intelligent people on the show with me that are well versed in everything. Everything.
We were from Bismarcky to Cuba to all kinds of stuff. Like Afghanistan.
Military industrial complex.
The UK.
Yep.
Who else is doing that?
My lemon is here.
So on that note, I am my father's son because my oldest daughter is 21 years older than her brother.
Don't call him the spackler for nothing.
So I have to go see. I get to see all my kids today, so that's gonna be pretty cool.
Pretty stressful, it sounds like.
No, it's actually pretty cool. The older boys, my dad has a pool, and the older boys are going to be lifeguards because they are big-time swimmers. So I'm excited to hang out with all the boys. My youngest son thinks both boys have the same name, so he just calls them all BJ.
All black people look alike. It's all right.
That is what he thinks. Little light-skinned bastard. I appreciate you guys. And on that note, we are out. Enjoy some cartoons.